I'd like to get started if we could. So I think we're up to Mr. Bluestein as a witness. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. And everything's already been admitted, and he's ready for cross-examination. Is that correct?
That's correct. I don't believe he needs to be re-sworn in.
Right.
He was.
Right. I think that's
So
okay
then I'll
to do.
just remind you that you remain under oath. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. So who has cross for Mr. Bluestein? Right. Okay.
Question or two.
All right. Go ahead.
I'm Richard Sodak. We've met across the room before. You conclude that oil heat blended with 20% biodiesel would create about the same GSG emissions as natural gas based on the 100-year basis. Is that correct?
Yeah, I didn't do a full analysis. I just did kind of a back of the envelope because my understanding is it's not actually available today, so it's kind of a hypothetical question.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Craig, did you have?
No, I don't have any questions, thank you.
Okay. I think we do.
Yes.
Yes, you want to start?
So, thank you. I'd like to understand more of what went into your life cycle analysis for the greenhouse gas impact of natural gas. And first, thank you. In case you didn't hear me, I'm interested first in getting to your life cycle analysis for the greenhouse gas impact of natural gas. First, were you applying a generic life cycle analysis or one specific to this project?
Specific to this project.
And then what gas sources were assumed? American, Canadian, fracked, conventional, or?
85% Western Canadian and 15% Eastern U.S.
What about method of extraction?
Fundamentally, all of it hydraulically fractured shale gas, although that's not all of the Alberta gas is actually shale gas, but we made a lot of conservative assumptions, so that was one.
On page 2 of your testimony from May 27th, line 9 on, you say your life cycle analysis includes, quote, the upstream emissions associated with extraction, processing, and transportation of the fuels, as well as the direct combustion emissions. What other activities were factored into that? For example, leakage at the wellhead, liquids unloading, that kind of factor.
Yeah, those were all included. The primary source was National Energy Technology Lab that went through all the phases of production, distribution, transmission, and accounted for all those different factors.
Is there any I didn't mention?
Oh, yeah, there are lots.
On page 5 of that testimony, lines 9 and 10, you state that the life cycle analysis for gas is, quote, 17% lower than oil and total emissions 22% lower, including boiler efficiency. Were you comparing apples to apples? That is, were you applying a life cycle analysis for oil as well as gas?
Yes.
And what about the greenhouse gas emissions resulting from, for example, truck delivery?
Yes. Now, I will say, of course, this was based on work that was done over 2 years ago. And our main reference for the oil side was a report that we had previously done for the New England fuel oil dealers, which was done a few years before that. So it doesn't include more recent developments in the oil markets, like oil from the Canadian oil sands, which has a higher greenhouse gas footprint, according to the Department of State, 17% higher. So that's not included. And also oil from the Bakken shale, which also has a higher greenhouse gas footprint. So if we were to redo it today, the oil would be higher.
In your exhibit JB5, you have some material that you didn't produce, but is industry material. Robert, I'm trying to remember, what was the source for that? JB5 was, it was ACS Publications, the American Chemical Society.
JB5 from this is the direct measurements, Lamb et al. Direct
Yes.
measurements from natural gas distribution systems.
Mhm.
Right, that's a study. It was done by the University of Washington, funded by the Environmental Defense Fund.
Okay, and in that exhibit, they say, I'm just going to read this statement. Because the global warming potential of methane is 28 to 34 times greater than carbon dioxide on a 100-year time frame, I'm skipping some, near-term reductions in methane emissions are a vital tool for slowing the rate of climate change. Therefore, an accurate estimate of the leak rate of methane from natural gas infrastructure is needed to understand the climate impacts of natural gas use and to identify opportunities for overall reductions in methane emissions. So was that consideration as a whole factored into your conclusions?
Which part? The need to reduce methane emissions?
Requiring the need for an accurate estimate of the leak rate of methane from the infrastructure.
Yes.
Thank you. Those are my general questions.
Okay.
I have a few questions. Hey, my name's Jake Marin. For the first set of questions, I'm going to be referring to the pre-filed testimony of George Gross. I'm looking at a corrected version that was filed on May 8th. I think I can just relate the general gist of this, so I don't know if you need to have it in front of you. The first topic I'd like to talk about is a point Mr. Gross made about the capacity of the project. Mr. Gross's testimony states that the capacity of the pipeline is twice as much as the amount of gas that was considered in your greenhouse gas analysis. And I was just wondering, what was your response to that testimony?
I didn't actually look at the capacity. The only capacity numbers I looked at were in the testimony from phase 1, which was based on the throughput from Ms. Simollardes' testimony. But my analysis was basically on a per cubic foot basis.
Okay, so assuming that per cubic foot amount that was included in your analysis doesn't reflect the entire capacity that could possibly go through this pipeline, is it still an accurate measure of the greenhouse gas impact of the project if it could potentially deliver more gas?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the emissions are not typically related to throughput, especially at the distribution level, because basically you're looking at leaks in the pipe. So if the pipe is pressurized and there's a leak, you get a certain amount of flow. It doesn't from the leak, but it's not really strongly correlated to how much is going through the pipe. So that's not really a strong factor in the distribution system emissions. Then the upstream emissions, are also per unit. So I don't think that's a big factor, except to the extent that since my analysis shows that you're reducing greenhouse gas emissions by using natural gas, if you use twice as much, you reduce twice as much. So that would have an implication.
That's assuming that it's replacing something that was dirty.
That's right.
But
That's
if
right.
it's actually creating new demand. then-
Well, yes, but then what would have that, what demand would have been, how would that have demand been met otherwise? Which we don't know.
Okay, thanks.
That was the next question I had. Anyways, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next point Mr. Gross makes is that Mr. Gross has a criticism about the company's GHG analysis that it presented as part of the docket 8010, which is the phase 2 pipeline. His criticism is that the analysis did not use the latest AGWP, or absolute global warming potential, that has been published by the International Panel on Climate Change. If he had directed this criticism at the analysis presented for this phase, would that criticism hold true?
No, we updated it to the latest numbers.
And so is that what explains the different value of greenhouse gas reductions presented in Ms. Simollardes' testimony? Originally, her testimony stated that there would be $21.7 million in savings, and now it's 20.8. Is that the...
Based on the economic value of carbon?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's another factor related to that economic analysis, because I didn't do that.
Okay.
But we did change, there were several changes between phase 1 and phase 2, and now. One of the other criticisms in phase one was that we didn't have enough Canada-specific information for the Canadian component. So we updated that in phase two, and then in this most recent one, we updated to the latest GWP.
Were there any other assumptions that were changed between the initial analysis and what's being presented now?
No, I think that's it.
So it appears that a point of contention between your testimony and the testimony presented by AARP's witness, Dr. Dismukes, and by the Palmer witnesses is that the correct framework for analyzing greenhouse gas impacts is looking at the 20-year global warming potential. I guess the first sort of clarifying question, is absolute global warming potential the same as global warming potential, or are these different terms?
I'm not familiar with absolute, but the global warming potential, I think, is the one that I use.
It would be helpful for us to better understand what the difference is between the 20-year measure and
Sure.
the 100-year measure. Are these instantaneous measurements, or do they capture sort of the cumulative impact over those time frames?
Right. So they, in fact, they are averaging. It's all about the averaging time. So CO2 is the baseline. CO2 has a life in the atmosphere of hundreds or many hundreds of years. But other greenhouse gases, and there are many of them, can be stronger than CO2 in their climate forcing, but have a shorter life. So methane, for example, has a stronger effect, but it only stays in the atmosphere for about 12.5 years. So, on the global warming timescale, it's here and gone quite quickly. And some of the other greenhouse gases have global warming potentials of 10,000, much stronger, but with different lifetimes. So the question is, how do you compare these in some useful way? So what they do is and this is the International Protocol for Climate Change, the UN organization, and so they have selected 3 historically time periods for averaging: 100-year, 20-year, and then historically 500-year. And so it's a little more complicated, this, because it's not exactly gone in 12 years, it's more of a half-life kind of thing, but they average over those time periods. So for a shorter lived gas like methane, if you average it over 20 years and it only lasts for 12.5, you're getting all of it compressed into 20 years. If you average over 100 years, it's spread out over time when it's actually not even really there. And then, of course, if you use a 500-year, it's even lower. So that's why the global warming potential for methane is higher on a 20-year basis than it is on a 100-year basis. So then the question is, well, which one should we use? Because even those are arbitrary. You could say, well, how much is it on the first day that it's emitted, right? Or after a week or a month, So these are just convenient averaging periods that have been defined. But what you find is that, by and large, people have chosen to use the 100-year value. So the EPA's National Inventory of Greenhouse Gases uses the 100-year GWP. The EPA's Greenhouse Gas Reporting Rule, which is a mandatory reporting rule where large emitters have to report their emissions, is 100 years. In the EPA's decision to use that for the reporting rule, they cite the UNFCCC and the IPCC as defining those as the best ones to use for those purposes, and actually requiring those for the international reporting of greenhouse gas emissions. And it's a little hard to tell from the website, but I think Vermont uses the protocols of the EPA in reporting. So I think that Vermont uses 100 years for the Vermont inventory. So all of those kind of authoritative sources use the 100-year inventory, the 100-year GWP. We did discuss this in phase 1, and the CLF witness agreed that given the long term of climate change and the long life of the asset, that 100 years was a reasonable time to use.
Can you tell me, why is it hard to tell what Vermont uses?
It's just not there from the website. I just was looking at the website, and there wasn't a specific reference.
What's the rationale? You say it's because it's over the life of the asset, but aren't we concerned about global warming in the near term as well as the long term?
Sure, and, you know, the value that we use doesn't necessarily reflect how concerned we are, but it is a long-term process. So it's a long climatic process, and again, it's a long-lived asset. I think in terms of, you know, concern, there is a lot going on to reduce methane emissions regardless of how you depict it. And I think if you look at, even between 2 years ago when I did my testimony, we've seen some of the exhibits that I presented that show recent measurements that show that due to turnover, voluntary actions, regulation, methane emissions are actually going down. So, you know, I think that's independent of how we depict it through the global warming potential.
And so it appears that in between when the first analysis was conducted 2 years ago for this project and now that the International Panel on Climate Change has come out with new numbers, would you consider the current set of GWPs to be something that's reliable and that this is a mature area of science, or is you know, the scientific community's understanding of GWP going to continue to evolve?
I think science is always evolving, so I wouldn't venture to guess what the analysis will show in the future. This is the 5th annual assessment report that came out last year. So there have been many years of analysis, and actually there are some new factors. So the factor went up for methane, but then there was a new twist. They said, well, yeah, but when the methane goes away, it turns into CO2. So we really should consider that. So there are actually several sets of numbers that came out. There's the raw methane, and there's what they call the feedback, including the CO2 that's formed. So, you know, it continues to evolve, and in this case, it's gone up, and we used actually the highest of the multiple values that they put out in the revised analysis.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question to the discussion about 100 years versus 20 years. And maybe I don't completely understand how global warming potential is defined. Is either of those, the 20 or 100 year, similar to like a rolling average? Do you keep track of CO2 that's entering 1 year and then its useful life ends in 12 and a half years or 25 years, then you drop it out of the average? Or
so
do you do something else?
It's actually, first of all, I should say, in case there are any climate scientists in the room, it's more complicated than this. So this is, because I'm a mechanical engineer, not a climate scientist, but it's more complicated than I've depicted it because of the climate atmospheric interactions. So let me just say that. But it depicts a pulse, in essence. If something is emitted in 1 year, it decays. It's not emitting a stream of emissions.
Okay, so it picks up how much is added whenever it is added,
Right.
and then it drops it out at the end of its life?
Right.
Any follow-up questions? Yes, Ms. Levine?
Hello, Mr. Bluestein. A couple of follow-up questions. You referred just now to changes in the IPCC numbers, I think, regarding both the raw methane and the feedback. Do you recall those questions in your response?
Yes.
Now, did your analysis include that, the feedback?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm looking at your Exhibit 9 in regards to a question from Mr. Marin about using Canadian-specific information for Phase 2.
Yes.
I see on your Exhibit 9 a reference to the change in the global warming potential from AR5, but I don't see how figures have changed from the Canadian-specific data.
You don't see it in the in that spreadsheet.
Yes.
It's
Is
not
it-
shown explicitly there. There's a whole series of spreadsheets behind this where we build up the life cycle emissions. And you might remember from phase 2 that we had a lot of discussion about the different sources of those emissions. So it's not shown in that, it's not shown explicitly in that spreadsheet.
So in which figure on this spreadsheet is it reflected?
In the gas number, in the upstream gas emissions.
The gas life cycle CO2e
Right.
figure? Okay. And that's all I have for follow-up. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Stoddard?
I take it this 100-year number is a kind of a negotiated number, isn't it? Isn't it a number that is arrived at among many nations who have various agendas and so on in this business?
I don't know how they came up with it originally. It's been used in all of the 5 assessment reports in the UN process. And I don't know how they came up with 100 years, although I would guess, scientists tend to just use round numbers. So somebody said, let's do 100, and someone said, let's do 20, and someone said, let's do 500. I don't know that there was a political agenda behind it.
Supposing there were a great deal of urgency to this problem of global warming, wouldn't it be more logical to analyze things on a 20-year basis than on a 100-year basis?
Well, I think there is a lot of urgency, but as I said, how we do the analysis of a long-term climatological phenomenon is not necessarily determine how we react to it. So, again, I'm not involved in those scientific discussions about how they set the timelines.
But wouldn't you agree with me that if we saw real urgency, we would be putting it on a 20-year track rather than 100?
Again, I think we need to put it on an immediate track, 20 years,
I'll take immediate.
All right, I think we need to, again, I think that's one reason. If you look at U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, they're dropping in large part because we're using more natural gas to replace coal. That's happened in the last few years because of low gas prices. So, and the White House has put in place an initiative to reduce methane emissions from the oil and gas sector. There were new regulations in 2012 to reduce emissions from some of these upstream sources. We're waiting for a new round of regulations that are going to be released this summer on reducing methane emissions. So, again, I think there are a lot more significant things that regulate how quickly we move that are more political in nature than how the global warming potential is calculated.
But it's still the case, is it not, that on a 20-year basis, the methane is going to have a more severe effect on global warming than, say, CO2?
Yes.
Any other questions for this witness? Okay, thank you, Mr. Bluestein. Are you ready for the next witness?
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
So this witness is ready for cross-examination, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Dumont, do you have questions?
I do. When you started work for Vermont Gas Systems, in preparing your testimony dated January 15th, did you read the economic analysis that Vermont Gas Systems had submitted in support of CPG it had obtained on December 23rd, excuse me, 2013.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your whole question.
Sorry. When you started to work for Vermont Gas,
Yes, we're talking phase one.
in preparing your testimony dated January 15th
Okay.
of 2015, did you read the economic analysis that Vermont Gas had submitted in support of the CPG it had obtained on December 23rd, 2013?
No, I had read that as part of phase two, something I had done before, but I did not read it at that time for the work that I began in January.
So you had already read Mr. Carr's economic analysis,
Yes.
and that's reproduced, at least in part, in Exhibit 39, Cross Exhibit 39. Let's return to that.
Yes, I have it.
Is Exhibit 39 a copy of Mr. Carr's pre-filed testimony dated December 20, 2012, and then corrected May 30th, 2012, followed by his Exhibit JC Table 1 revised, and then a short piece explaining some of his corrections.
Yes, I see that.
Mr. Carr considered the disposable income lost by ratepayers, am I correct?
Do you have a particular page?
Well, if you need to look at it, first, do you remember whether or not he considered the disposable income lost by ratepayers?
I haven't read his report for this hearing.
Well, I'll represent to you that he did, and if you look at his testimony in detail, you will see that. So I'm wondering why you didn't.
Well, first of all, the most important question is what I was asked to do. I was asked to do two things here. Initially, I was asked to provide an estimate of the economic impacts from the construction of the project, given the new cost estimate, and that's in my earlier testimony. And then in the rebuttal testimony, I was asked basically to take a look at Dr. Dismuke's testimony and make comments on that. So that was my task. My task was not to prepare my own independent economic impact analysis.
As an experienced economist, you've used the Redine model many times,
Yes.
and the Remy model many times,
Not as many, but yes, I've used it.
and those models allow an economist to include in the modeling the lost disposable income that results from increased rates.
You can add lost disposable income to the models, yes.
And I'll represent to you, that's what Mr. Carr did. Why didn't it make sense to you in submitting your testimony to this board about the economic impacts of the project not to include that?
Again, to be polite, I did not submit to the board my own estimate of what the economic impacts are. I, again, just looked at the construction impacts, that's all I was asked to do, and then I was asked to comment on Dr. Duke's testimony. So I have no independent net economic benefit calculation that I presented to the board.
Okay, thank you. Similar question about the jobs lost and the payments lost from the loss of fuel dealer jobs, fuel dealer deliveries, fuel oil deliveries and propane deliveries, is what I meant to say. Mr. Carr considered the lost jobs and the lost payments that would result when the pipeline replaces fuel dealers and their employees. Do you recall that?
Yes.
You didn't include that either, did you?
Again, I didn't have anything to include. I didn't do an analysis of my own of net economic impacts.
Do you recall the NPV conclusion that Mr. Carr reached?
No.
I'll represent to you that it was $300 million NPV. Does that sound familiar?
I don't remember what I reached, no, I couldn't tell you.
Do you recall what time period he used? 20, 35, 55 years?
No, I don't remember.
I'll represent to you as 20 years. When he did his analysis, Was the cost of the project $86 million?
You know, again, you're asking about something that I haven't reviewed for this analysis, so I don't know what it was when he did it.
When he did his analysis, was the price of oil $100 a barrel or over?
It was probably around there, yes.
What's the price of oil today per barrel?
I didn't look it up at $60 a barrel, something like that.
I'd like to discuss that with you at some length. If you could turn to your testimony on page 6 of your January 15th report. Your report states on page 6 that oil is close
Just a
to
moment,
the...
please.
And the report is exhibit 2 of testimony?
I believe so.
Okay, my January 15th testimony,
Yes.
okay. And we're on page 6, line,
You state oil is close to the bottom and will slowly climb back to $100 per barrel over the next 3 years.
oh yes, on line 18.
Right, so you're referring to his testimony.
I'm sorry,
not the
I-
attached report.
Yes, I misspoke. It's his testimony.
Yes, so it basically, let me just read what it says again. For example, the current oil price from Moody's Analytics expects that, quote, oil is close to a bottom and will slowly climb back to $100 per barrel over the next 3 years.
Moody's doesn't say that anymore, does it?
No, they change their forecast like many people.
You could turn to our exhibit 2, cross exhibit 2. Do you know what, have you seen this document before?
No, it doesn't look, is this from 6/18 or is that just when you printed it?
That's just when I printed it. It says global.
It's from
President-
February 11th. No, but I read it this morning.
Does this appear to be an accurate copy of the Moody's Global Credit Research Report from February of this year?
I would trust that that's what you produced, yes.
And on the second page, we put in boldface, does this state that Moody's global growth outlook is based on the assumption that oil prices will average $55 a barrel Brent in 2015, rising to $65 on average in 2016?
Yes.
And is it your testimony that you expect price per barrel to jump from $65 in 2016 to $100 in 2017?
No, it is not my testimony about what oil prices are going to do. What I gave was the forecast that was presented from Moody's Analytics at the time I did my report. It was, in my view, representative of the types of forecasts we would get, and I think it was also relevant to consider in that Moody's forecasts are the basis of the economic forecasts that the rest of the state uses for state revenue forecasts and whatever. So they think it's worthwhile to consider. It's not the only one out there, but it's one of the forecasts to consider.
Do you consider yourself an expert on predicting future oil prices?
As much as anybody else. No, I cannot predict future oil prices.
If you could turn to across exhibit 31.
Yes?
Have you seen that this is an EIA document, correct?
Yes.
Have you seen this one before?
Yes, I have.
Does this predict that the price of oil per barrel will not reach $100 until 2030?
If we look at the top, the Brent spot price, that's what they have, yes.
Do you agree with that?
I don't agree or disagree. What I looked at, all of the forecasts that one sees when they read all the economic press, and in my view, the basic forecast is one that shows that oil prices will rebound, not in the short term, but they'll rebound over time, something I expressed as a period of up to about 3 years. Where exactly they will rebound to is anybody's guess. There are forecasts all over the place.
If you could turn to exhibit 32. Reuters report on Goldman Sachs's predictions.
Yes?
Is Goldman Sachs one of those sources of information you would find reliable about oil price?
It's one of the sources that I would read. It's not the best, but I would certainly read it and take it into consideration.
As of January of 2015, does Goldman Sachs predict prices in the high 30s in 2015 and in the 60s or 70s in 2016?
Okay, if I'm reading the same thing you are, that for 2016, they're seeing Brent oil at $70.
Exhibit 32, the bank said on Monday it had cut its 2015 forecast for Brent to $50.40 a barrel.
This is Exhibit 32?
Yes.
Okay, what page we got?
It's Goldman Sachs slashes oil price forecast.
Yes, I'm on that one.
Okay.
What paragraph?
It's the 1, 2, 3, 5th paragraph.
Okay. It said they had cut its 2015 forecast to $50.40 from $83.75 and reduced its 215 a separate price. It's a different
The
name.
separate price is West Texas Intermediate,
Yeah.
and they predicted that.
It predicted the Texas price to go to 47.15 from 73.75.
And reading on, they had a prediction for 2016.
In 2016, they see Brent at 70, West Texas at 65, down from 90 and 80.
If you could turn to Exhibit 35.
Yes?
As part of your consulting work as an economist, do you ever look at crude oil futures?
Rarely.
Do you know how to interpret the document that's in front of you?
Not as I sit here. I don't think there's enough information to know exactly what futures price they're talking about.
Okay. Have you ever seen a document such as this before?
I haven't looked at this one, no.
Have you ever looked at a document of this type setting forth crude oil futures settlements?
No, I haven't looked at crude oil futures, no.
Okay. If you turn to Exhibit 36, World Bank price forecast.
Yes,
Is the
it
World
looks like
Bank
that.
Sorry.
Yes, it looks to be that.
Is the World Bank a reliable source of information about oil prices in the future?
It's one of the sources, yes.
Does the World Bank predict that oil per barrel will be $57 in 2016?
I'm going to object. I'm not, there isn't a foundation for this document. It appears to be an excerpt, and it's really hard to tell the source of this document.
Mr. Heaps, does this appear to be a printout of the World Bank commodities price forecast from the website at worldbank.org?
It certainly says on the top, it's World Bank Commodities Price Forecast, whether it's their mean forecast, a high forecast, a low forecast, there's other forecasts, I don't know. But it is a forecast.
Have you ever in your career consulted with World Bank commodity price forecasts?
No, I haven't used the World Bank.
Okay. Turn to Exhibit 38.
Mr. Dumont?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Hayden, what is it you're objecting to exactly? Because I don't think your witness has actually answered the question that Mr. Dumont has asked about that particular document.
He hasn't, and I think that the same is true for Exhibit 35. Exhibit 36, he hasn't laid a foundation to even establish what this document is. and the witness clearly hasn't seen it before. Exhibit 37 looks to be the same type of a document. There's no foundation that's been laid to even explain what this is and how it's going to be used with this witness.
Yes, and when the witness said he wasn't familiar with Exhibit 36, I stopped asking him about it.
That's what I thought.
So I moved on to Exhibit 38.
Which one are you on now?
38. Are you familiar with IMF oil price forecasts?
No, I'm familiar with the IMF, but I don't consult IMF oil price forecasts in any regular fashion. In fact, I don't think I've ever looked at it.
And I want to ask you about that. So as you sit here today, do you feel it's within your competence to address future oil prices, or would you leave that to others?
I'd be willing to say, within my competence, that I believe the typical forecast, median forecast, if you want, of economists, is that oil prices will rebound somewhere in the short term, likely not go back up to where they were before. But there's a great deal of variability in that. Some will have a modest rebound, and some will have a very high rebound. And there are outliers to that. There are those who will say there's no rebound, and others that say it's going to be very high. It's a very turbulent time in the oil market.
I'd like to turn to your May 27th pre-file testimony.
Yes, I have it. Yes?
You refer to this as NPV of economic benefit results for corrected DED 3, correct?
Yes.
And the first column is 20 years, and at 4.99% you predict $7 million negative.
That is correct.
And at 7.938% you predict $10 million negative, correct?
Correct.
That's over the 20-year period, correct?
Yes.
Now, if you could turn to cross exhibit 1. Cross exhibit 1 is excerpts from the board's order on December 23rd, 2013. You've read this order, I assume.
Not for a while.
When's the last time you read the board's order?
This is from 2013. I don't remember. I don't remember when the last time I read this one.
Well, let me ask you, on the first page I reproduce is just the cover page with the table of contents. And then the second page is the introduction. And I highlighted a paragraph on the left, put a bar down the line.
Yes.
Down the left-hand margin. And you'll see, if you read this, the board addressed the NPV over a 20-year period. Do you see that?
About 5 lines down, it says it was realized over a 20-year period.
Yes. Okay. And then the next page I reproduced, it summarizes the parties' opinions, and it's under Vermont Gas. There's a paragraph I put a line in the margin next to.
Yes, I see that.
And this says, the evidence in this proceeding demonstrates that the project will result in over $200 million in energy savings to Addison County residences and businesses for the next 20 years, correct?
Correct.
No mention of any other time period, correct?
Not in that paragraph, no.
Okay. The next page I reproduced starts with 52 on the left hand, so in the board, that means that in the board's original opinion as printed by the board, this is page 52, not the Westlaw version of it. I put a line down the left-hand margin. And once again, do we see the board is looking at the value of the project over a 20-year period?
Yes, again, 20 years is mentioned there.
Next page, I highlighted finding 247. Again, the board is making a finding about the NPV of the project over a 20-year period, correct?
Correct.
The next page is a reprint of the same page, but it has two more paragraphs aligned on the left-hand margin. Paragraph, finding 247 has a second paragraph, number 5, that again refers to the 20-year period ending 2031.
Yes.
And this is a summary of Mr. Carr's testimony, correct?
Yes, it is.
And then in finding 249, the board finds, quote, over the next 20 years, the project is expected to result in an increase in economic output of between 0.6 and 21.9 million annually, citing Mr. Carr's profile, correct?
Yes.
The next page I reproduced is part of finding 307, I'm sorry, 308. Starting on slip opinion, page 69, the board found in its petition, Vermont Gas initially projected that the project would reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Vermont by approximately 296,000 tons over a 20-year period, with an associated carbon reduction savings of $17.1 million, citing Ms. Simollardes pre-filed, correct?
Correct.
The next page I reproduce is part of finding 323. It's a summary of emissions impacts of the project, and the time period covered is the 20-year period, correct?
2 periods there, yeah, but yes, there is.
20 years and 100 years.
Yes.
Do you recall any mention in this December 23rd, 2013 order of conducting NPV analysis during any time period longer than 20 years?
Again, I have not read it, but as we went through things, I didn't see anything other than 20 years.
So if one purpose of this proceeding is to say, to determine what if the board knew then what it knows now, we need to stick with the 20-year metric, don't we?
No, I would not recommend the board sticking with 20 years. I'm not sure why 20 years was even there. I think what you need to do is with any project, if you're going to measure the benefits and the costs, you have to look over the period of time in which the benefits are accrued and the costs are also paid. If we had a project here where the benefits fell over 10 years and the costs were 5 years, we'd have to look at the project over 10 years. If it was the reverse, where the benefits were shorter than the cost, you look over the longer period so that you capture all the benefits and all the costs. In this project, it is a very long-lived project. And when I reviewed Dr. Dismuke's analysis, I recommended that we use a period long enough to capture all of the significant benefits and costs which occur. And in this case, in the corrected analysis, I gave the NPV over 55 years. There comes a point in time when you're discounting so much that it doesn't matter to go much further. But there was a difference between his 35-year number and the 55-year number. But the important thing is, if the project has costs or benefits that last 27 years, then you have to analyze it over 27 years as an economist. If it lasts 38 years, you have to go over 38 years to capture all the costs and all the benefits, and then you discount it appropriately to the present.
So what was the 35-year NPV of the project as found by the board on December 23rd, 2013?
I don't know.
Do you think Mr. Carr's report might help us answer that question?
I don't know. Like I said, I haven't read it since phase 2. It's been a long time.
Did Mr. Carr find that there would be continuing job losses into the future?
I'm not sure. I think he may have, but I'm not positive.
See if I can refresh your recollection. Did Mr. Carr find that the one-time spike in construction jobs would compensate for the continuing loss of jobs during the first 20 years he studied?
No, I just remember he talked about the one-time spike in the construction jobs, and he had that correct, yes.
I want to talk with you briefly about discount rates. You criticized Dr. Dismuke's use of a discount rate, correct?
Yes.
began work in this case, did you read the Department of Public Services pre-filed testimony that had been filed in the months leading up to the December 23rd, 2013 CPG?
I did read that a while ago, yes.
If you could turn to Cross Exhibit 40, did you read Mr. Kumar's testimony?
Yes, I did.
Is Mr. Kumar an expert in utility economics?
I don't know Mr. Kumar. I think he does say he is, but I don't know him.
Do you consider yourself an expert in utility economics?
In utility economics?
Yes.
No, I'm an expert in economics.
Let me read to you his answer on page 16 of Exhibit 40. As acknowledged by Mr. Carr in his response to PSD:VGS.2-12, his computed benefits relate to VGS customers. Therefore, it would not be unreasonable to use the customer's marginal cost of capital, which is generally close to the credit card interest rates, and which therefore could be as high as 25%. At the very least, the discount rate should not be below VGS's cost of capital. Were you aware of that when you wrote your testimony, both your testimonies in this case?
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
No, not at all.
Exhibit 4 to your May 27th testimony is the Office of Management and Budget, Circular A4, correct?
Circular A4? Yes, I'm there.
Dr. Dismukes referenced this in his first pre-filed testimony, correct?
Yes.
Before Dr. Dismukes, before you read about it in Dr. Dismukes' testimony, had you ever read Circular A4?
No.
So you found out about it by reading Dr. Dismukes' pre-filed testimony?
Yes.
If you could turn to page 15 of your Exhibit 4.
Yes. This is where it starts general issues?
Yes, and then there's a discussion of developing a baseline. It states, you need to measure the benefits and costs of a rule against a baseline. This baseline should be the best assessment of the way the world would look absent the proposed action. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Okay, so in this case, if this pipeline is not constructed, the way the world will look is there will be CNG facilities already in the Middlebury area, correct?
I don't know if there will be or not. I'm not an energy expert. I can't tell you that.
Have the CNG facilities been constructed already?
Yes. I think there are businesses can receive compressed natural gas.
And does your client, VGS, plan to include the costs of those CNG facilities in its rate base?
I don't know that.
I will address that with Ms. Simollardes. So you don't know whether the baseline for this project should be with or without the CNG facilities?
Again, I did not conduct my own analysis of the net economic benefits of this project, and therefore I didn't consider those questions.
If you could turn to page 33 of your exhibit.
I just had a follow-up
Yes.
to that last statement of yours, Mr. Heaps. Could you distinguish what you just said from what you say on page 3 of your testimony?
Page 3 of your testimony, where on line 16 you say, my testimony presents and summarizes our firm's study of the economic impact to Vermont from the construction of the Addison-Rutland Natural Gas Project Phase 1 in light of the second cost estimate update submitted to the board on December 19th. What did you mean by that statement, and why doesn't that cover some of the questions that Mr. Dumont has been asking you, but which you said you didn't study?
Okay. Of the net economic benefit which was calculated and presented by Ms. Simollardes, I did the calculation for the construction benefits and wages. I did the tax calculation during construction. And the rest of it she did. I took a look at what she did, but I did not do that analysis. So I did, of the, what do you want to say, the 4 major items, I did 2 of them. I didn't do all.
Correct, thank you. Sorry, Mr. Dumont.
Page 33 is a page you referred to in your pre-filed testimony, correct? You, in your testimony, you referred to the bottom paragraph on page 33, correct?
Yes.
If you could read the first two sentences of the second paragraph on page 33, please. Read them out loud.
As a default position, OMB Circular A94 states that a real discount rate of 7% should be used as a base case for regulatory analysis. The 7% rate is an estimate of the average before-tax rate of return to private capital in the U.S. economy.
Do you agree with that?
Yes, I agree with that statement, but what's important to note is they're talking there that that is what should be used for the rate of return of private capital. If we're looking at the gains to Vermont society, in this case, the gains to Vermont residents as required under 248B4, we're really looking at, if on that same page, go down to the fourth paragraph, where it says, the effects of regulation do not always fall exclusively or primarily on the allocation of capital. When regulation primarily and directly affects private consumption through higher consumer prices for goods and services, a lower discount rate is appropriate. The alternative most often is sometimes called the social rate of time preference. I think that's the key paragraph.
So let's talk about that. Would you agree with me that if this were a rate-setting case, the board's decision in that event would directly affect consumers?
I would say if this is a rate-setting case where you're looking at the return to capital, then we would be talking about the higher rate of 7% here.
If
Or something else.
you could return to the second paragraph on page 33, referring to the 7% discount rate, does it state, it is the appropriate discount rate whenever the main effect of a regulation is
Just a moment, where are you?
middle of the paragraph.
The second paragraph.
Yep.
And how many lines down?
5. Middle of the sentence. It is the appropriate discount rate whenever the main effect of a regulation is to displace or alter the use of capital in the private sector.
Yeah, and the key there is capital in the private sector,
Is
yes.
Vermont Gas in the private sector?
Yes, Vermont Gas is.
So is the main effect of the board's decision, in this case, to displace or alter the use of capital in the private sector?
In terms of looking at the economic benefit analysis, again, 248B4, is this project an economic benefit to the state and its residents? We're looking at the benefit to its residents, not the benefit to Vermont Gas, not the benefit or the harm that might be caused to the fuel oil dealers. We're looking at the benefits or costs to Vermont residents. In that case, we're looking at their disposable income, or ultimately we're looking at their consumption. That's why you want to earn income, so you can change their consumption. Since we're focusing in 248B4 on the residents and their consumption, that's why you want to use the societal discount rate. This isn't the return to the company. This isn't the return or the harm to some other company. It's the return to the society as a whole, Vermont residents, and that's the key.
Let's turn to the quote you relied on the bottom of the page. Quote, when regulation primarily and directly affects private consumption, a lower discount rate is appropriate. You were present this morning when Mr. Rendell testified, were you not?
Yes, it was.
And wasn't he making the argument that we're not deciding in this case how much consumers are going to pay? That's for another case.
That's right.
Thank you, that's all I have. Mr. Sauter?
Mr. Heaps, on page 8 of your rebuttal testimony, lines 14 and on, you say that the loss of gallons purchased out of state will not adversely impact Vermont companies, and cite Agrimark purchase as an example.
Yes.
In fact, you didn't break out how many of those gallons delivered from Quebec, New York, and Berlin, Vermont were hauled by Vermont residents and taxpayers, did you?
No, I did not.
You didn't try to assess what that economic impact would be?
No, I didn't.
Do you know what that number is?
Not as I sit here, no.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have some questions.
Your analysis indicates an increase in the number of jobs in Vermont. Am I correct that these are almost exclusively short-term construction-related jobs?
Yes, yeah, they're basically over, and if these go as scheduled, 2016.
And your analysis doesn't include any long-lasting jobs in your study?
No, there really isn't much in the way of a long-lasting impact after that. Maybe a little bit the next year, but not enough to spend time on.
And so the economic value you're producing is the short-term jobs plus the secondary impacts associated with that?
Yes, it is, and just to clarify two things, it is short-term, so we have to realize it's over. But at the same time, that doesn't diminish the significance. I mean, our construction industry, which is 12% of the Vermont, or about 7% of the Vermont economy, lives by these short-term projects year after year. So they are short-term, but they are important.
Okay. Now, as I read Dr. Dismuke's testimony, he estimated somewhere in the range of 724 job years for the project. Is that in the same ballpark that your figures are? It seemed like your figure was more like around 890.
We were very close. There's a little bit different time period in which he had the spending than I did. I believe in his model, he threw all the spending in 1 year, and I had the spending spread over 2.5 years. But again, I didn't raise the issue because, again, they're all the short-term construction, and whether 1,000 happened in 2016 or 500 in 2015 and 500 in 2016, it's still the same number of jobs, the same people building the pipeline at the same place. So ultimately, they'd add up the same, and we were very close.
Okay. Next question that I wanted to get into is in your May testimony, you commented on Dr. Dismuke's assumptions concerning job loss. Do you
Yes.
recall that?
Yes.
And it starts at the bottom of page 3, and again on page 7. I understand your criticism of this testimony, but isn't it fair to incorporate some adjustment to the economic cost benefit analysis to reflect the fact that some jobs are likely to be lost, at least for a period of time?
I wouldn't disagree if you did it for a very short time. There will be some disruption, and people have to move from the jobs they would have had with fuel, oil, propane dealers and find jobs elsewhere in the economy. But that's something that's likely to occur less than a year's time, given that, thank God, we're out of the position we were 5-6 years ago. The economy's doing quite well. And so people will be able to move and find new jobs. And so the effect on the state and its residents will be very, very limited.
Well, I mean, basically, to some degree, you're trading off a limited job plus effect, which you just described as construction benefits over a year to short-term, the same type of limited effect on job loss on the other side. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is.
You didn't attempt to model the amount of the economic impact associated with the job losses, did you?
No, I wouldn't have modeled it, and if I did, I would have had it use some Department of Labor data in Vermont, and the transition would have been something that would have occurred in less than half a year.
And do you have any idea as to the magnitude of that negative impact compared to the positive impact that you produce?
The magnitude is very small. I think you could take the direct input from Dr. Dismuke's in the first year and cut it in half and say that would be the impact that would occur. And it would be a rough number, in a small number.
You were also discussing the discount rate just a few minutes ago. Do you recall that?
Yes, very important discussion.
And I understand why you believe the 3% or the 3% real, 4.99% nominal rate is appropriate. But as I was reading Dr. Dismuke's testimony, one of the concerns that he's raising is that there's a lot of uncertainty associated with this project. And at least I inferred, perhaps incorrectly from that he was advocating a higher discount rate to take into account the uncertainty about the future. Do you agree with that?
Well, I'll agree with part of it, but not a solution. Yeah, there's a great deal of uncertainty about the future. And that's why you discount. If we discount by the 3% real, 5% now, 4.99%, let's call it 5% nominal, we're really discounting that concern with the future. 5% means in a dollar earned or a dollar cost in 14 years, you only count it as 50 cents. A dollar cost in 28 years, you count as 25 cents. You discount it by taking 3/4 of it away. And then if you go out 42 years, you're only counting 12 cents of it. I mean, that's the point of discounting, is things in the future are more uncertain. So you discount it heavier. If you're out 35 years, you discount it by 35 years. So you don't change the discount rate, but you use additional number of years to discount it heavier. And so if you were asking me the difference between if I had done an estimate for year 75 and Dr. Dismukes did one for 75, I said, well, it doesn't make any difference. You know, out 75 years, we've discounted it to nothing because there's so much uncertainty that's involved. Changing the discount rate as you go out would not be an appropriate thing to do. You've settled on what the appropriate discount rate is. You let the number of years make it bite harder and harder as you go in the future.
So you're saying, I mean, to use the numbers you just gave me, that if the value of a dollar today, or the value of a dollar in 14 years is 50 cents of what it is today.
At the 4.99, yeah.
The number you just used, that adequately captures all the uncertainty that is likely to occur in terms of fuel prices and climate change issues.
Well, let me stick with the first part, if I could interrupt you. Sure. Climate change makes it much more difficult. It gets down to the whole question of what is the appropriate discount rate to use, and we could discuss this for ages, and economists have discussed this forever. The important thing is to look at what we're discounting and what the risk is involved. It's easier when you're discounting like the business profits. We would haggle back and forth, but we would end up doing the cost of capital or something like that, and we wouldn't have too much problem. Now we're using a societal benefit. What is the value we should use for societal benefit? Here I have to rely on what others have done that have looked at this, and in this case, the Office of Management Budget is very clear that the societal benefit should be a lower rate than that cost of capital, and they suggest that historically the return to 30-year U.S. Treasuries, the organization, U.S. government, we believe is supplying benefits to the public, they believe that 30-year rate, which averaged 3% real, should be what you'd use. There's also, and just to note, is if we want to use the most current data, the real rate has been, about 1.4%. We didn't use that from the standpoint of, we'd be arguing about what's the future of interest rates. And I'll tell you, I don't know what the future of interest rates are going to be. So the 3% rate is what is suggested by OMB for societal benefits, And I will go along with them on that.
I was going to say, I would love to be able to get a 3% real rate on the government bond right about now, but it's not happening. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Anybody else here? Any follow-up to our questions? Just one, Mr. Dumont?
What was it about Dr. Dismuke's report that led you to conclude he was treating job losses as permanent as opposed to, what was it that led you to conclude he was treating each unemployed person as permanently unemployed as opposed to looking at the loss of job opportunities?
If you take a look at his DED 3, here I'm looking at his May 6th testimony. Okay, I'm looking at Dr. Dismuke's DED 3 testimony from May 6, 2015. And his DED 3 that's titled Impact of Addison Natural Gas Project on Vermont Economic Employment. Here he's talking employment. And if we look under column M, the direct losses, these are the employment losses that he estimates to fuel dealers. He has in 2020 minus 53, and in 2030 minus 76, and then it grows to minus 100, minus 123. He's got some job losses which he thinks present a negative economic impact to Vermont residents 20, 30, even 40 years out into the future. And he has them growing. So he believes there's some negative thing that's harming Vermont residents by up to, on average, 95 jobs a year. In my view as an economist, that's not going to happen. Think of what has happened in Chittenden County in the last 5, 6 years. Vermont Gas has extended the pipeline to, I believe they testified, Underhill and Jericho already. So if we had done that analysis back then, there are some job losses to fuel oil dealers out there right now. And in fact, if we use that kind of analysis, whenever some business is displaced by some other business, there's some job losses. And those job losses, by his analysis, continue. So looking at the Vermont economy, he's telling me there are job losses that are harming employment in Chittenden County from the fuel oil dealers. There's job losses in Chittenden County at the landline telephone business from the cell phone companies. There's job losses in Chittenden County from all the tellers who would have worked at the banks if the ATMs weren't brought forward. If I estimated those, I would have estimated tens, hundreds, or tens or thousands of job losses in Chittenden County. As an economist, I could calculate those things that he did. But is there a harm to Vermont residents from that? After all those things occurred, we're back to an unemployment rate of about 2.7 in Chittenden County. We're growing faster than the rest of the state. Our economy is doing well. No Vermont or no Chittenden County resident has been harmed by the expansion of the pipeline, the expansion of these other types of businesses. So you could calculate a hypothetical job loss, but it's not a real employment loss to Vermont citizens, Vermont residents. They make the adjustment to these changes. These changes occur all the time. And if they make those adjustments, we'll be back to a period of full employment and we'll be enjoying the aspect of lower gas prices to heat our homes. So I would not subtract that because those are simply calculable job losses that are not real. They're hypothetical losses. And over time, very short time, they go away. So that's why I would not count them.
I apologize if my question wasn't clear. My question was, why are you assuming that Dr. Dismuke's report treats the losses as keeping that worker unemployed for the rest of his life, as opposed to what you just said, which is these are job losses per year in the economy.
Well, his title is employment. If you read that page, he's telling us that this is measures of employment in the economy. And so his thing says employment is down by 100 and some each year. There are jobs, and a job is a type of work you do at a place. Employment is a count of the number of people who are doing jobs. And he has these things down there. Even if he thinks they're jobs, again, I would question what are these jobs? They're not jobs that anybody is going to be filling anytime soon. The people that used to do those are doing something else now. And that's what we do all the time in the economy. We always move and adjust, and we don't count endlessly the losses from some shock to the economy.
On page 3 of your pre-filed, lines 19 to 21, you wrote, "It is not reasonable."
Just a moment, please. Page 3, did you say?
Yes.
By January 15th?
May 27th. Your May 27th.
Oh, May 27th, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm there now, sorry.
Last 3 lines. "It is not reasonable, however, to assume that all displaced workers will remain unemployed for much more than a very short period, let alone 35 years. We therefore eliminate this net loss from the net benefit analysis." And I'm trying to understand why you read into Dr. Dismuk's report some implication that a job loss per year leads to a worker who is out of work for 35 years.
First of all, when I read his table clearly tells me that employment is down by 50, 75, 100. I go out 35 years and his table says employment is 100 less. If that means employment is 100 less, that means there are 100 Vermont residents that are fewer employed than there would be otherwise. And we go out that period of time, we will not find, we don't have to get close to that period of time, we will not find that residents remain unemployed. When something happens, and something happens to your business, and that business contracts, people have to move and go to other places. There are temporary disruptions, but they move to other places, they get other jobs. And you count a few years down the line, and what's happened to employment? It tends to get back to full employment over time. So I don't believe there is an unemployment loss, as this table says.
So you understand that the folks that Mr. Cota and Mr. Sodak are representing, they are not going to be in year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 35. They are going to be losing jobs, correct?
They're going to see a loss in jobs in the year the pipeline opens up. They're not going to be happy about it, and they're going to have to let people go. What's important is not what happens to his firm. We're looking at the economic benefit to the state and its residents, not the benefits to Vermont Gas, not the benefits or harm to the fuel oil dealers, the benefits to Vermont residents in the state. And so what happens to the people that have to leave his place? They move quickly and find another job in the expanding economy, and a few years hence, you would never know that that was a bigger business than it had been prior to that.
Well, you might not, but isn't what Dr. Dismuk's doing very simple? He's saying in year 0, there are X number of jobs, people driving the trucks, accepting the fuel bills, whatever it is. In year 0, you're going to have X number of jobs. In year 1, you're going to lose, you'll have a fraction of those. In year 2, you're going to have a fraction of those. In year 3, you're going to have a fraction of those. All the way through year 35. Each year, those jobs that Mr. Cota's clients, Mr. Sodak's clients don't have, those jobs aren't coming back. Each year, the pipeline will have the same effect of displacing them. Do you understand that's what his testimony is?
Yes, and it's
Okay.
true. In his place, each year, there would not be those jobs that would have been there. But our economic benefit analysis says the Vermont residents, it says the number of jobs in the economy, you're not counting them up. What we know what happened is to Vermont residents who were working for him in the first year and lost their job, they went somewhere else. It took a while for the transition, but with the expanding economy, they found a job somewhere else. And so we don't find somebody 5 years later and we say, what are you doing? I'm unemployed. I used to be a fuel oil dealer. There's no jobs there. Well, what they're doing, they're now delivering for Ben & Jerry's. They're delivering for somebody else, or they're working at Home Depot. They moved on to other jobs. And that's what happens in the economy. So the benefits to Vermont residents don't involve if there's more jobs at Vermont Gas, if there's less jobs in the fuel oil dealers. The benefits in this case involve such things, particularly as fuel savings and costs of the project. That's what matters.
Thank you.
Mr. Heaps, I just want to follow up on this point and listening to your exchange with Mr. Dumont. Is your problem with the presentation here in DED 3, page 2, basically the summing of the number of jobs?
No, my whole argument is continuing to calculate them. And I know you can. I mean, we all use these models. These models will let you calculate them, spit them out. You could calculate this job loss through the year 3,075. It's just that it is not a loss to the residents of the state. They make adjustments to this. This is the normal thing that goes on. And as a result, we will get back to a period where employment will be the same as if it would have been if we had done this or not, but our disposable incomes will be higher because the cost of heating is lower. That's what you want to focus on. That's the economic benefit to residents.
Right, I understand that, but I guess in terms of some of the disagreement you were having with Dr. Dismukes, if I just look at the row 2049 one here, on this table, it looks like there is an incremental job loss in that particular year projected here. Well, actually, there are two ways to read this. It's either cumulative, it looks like it's incremental, of 153 jobs.
I think it's the total each year. It's 39 in the second year, it goes up by 5 to 44 the next year. So I think it's the cumulative sum.
So you're viewing this as a cumulative as opposed to absolute numbers of jobs lost each year. That's exactly why I'm asking these questions.
Yeah, I think the appropriate way to read it is you look all the way in the bottom of this table. By 2049, he thinks there'll be 153 less jobs with fuel oil dealers than there would have been otherwise.
And so you're interpreting it as a cumulative sum as opposed to that he's thinking in that year 153 additional employees and jobs will be lost. That's what I'm trying to hone in.
My answer is this: I never would have calculated this out and gone that far, because in the first few years when the pipeline's built and people do their conversion, that's when the changes occur. And the Vermont residents who were working for the fuel oil dealers now have to go somewhere else. If there were no other jobs for them, and that's it, they went home and collected unemployment insurance, we got a job loss. And we got an employment loss and a wage loss, I would count that. But that's not the situation we have. They're going to leave there and they're going to move on to the economy to other things, which is what always happens. It's always turmoil in the economy. And so as a result, I wouldn't have calculated it, even though my computer would do it. I would just let the change occur in that initial year in which people made the adjustment, and then that would be it. I would be done.
I'll leave it there, thank you.
You're saying there's a type of job loss, but there's no actual job loss.
There is a hypothetical job loss. Initially, there are people that lose those jobs, and then they get employed somewhere else.
All right, so the type of job loss here would be fuel dealer, fuel delivery person.
Yes.
But there's no actual job loss because the fuel delivery person becomes unemployed in some other capacity, is that correct?
Well, they do lose the job there. If they went to the door of the fuel oil dealer, there's no longer, want to hire.
But they go on to get a job someplace else.
Someplace else.
And so that's why you say there's been no actual job loss.
No, there is a hypothetical job loss that would have continued on if the firm had continued on. But the people who lost jobs, because remember, our economic benefit is the Vermont residents. And I have to ask the question, in pick some year down here, 2030, are there any Vermont residents who used to be delivery people for fuel oil dealers who are now harmed by this? And the answer is they've got other jobs. They're doing other things. So you can't count those things on and on and on as if it's an endless loss.
Any other questions? Okay. Any follow-up to all of this? Any redirect?
No redirect.
Okay. So we're going to take a 15-minute break, and then when we come back, we'll talk to Mr. Sinclair. And I think I'd like to talk about where we are and how late we'll go. I think we've got Mr. Sinclair up now. There's not too much for him, as I see this. And then same thing with Mr. St. Hilaire. And then I'd like to really try to be sure we try to start with Ms. Simollardes today, if possible, so we can stay on the schedule and finish tomorrow. Does anybody see a problem with that?
Just,
Yeah.
one concern that we have not received cross-examination exhibits for Ms. Simollardes from the Palmers.
Okay.
So we've had this conversation.
I wanted to move some exhibits
Okay.
from Mr. Heaps. I wanted to move, first of all, Exhibit 39. I don't know what the board's position is about testimony in the same case that was already admitted, whether I need to move it or not. It's the same docket number.
You don't need to move it, it's already in the record in this case.
So I won't move Exhibit 39. Same with Exhibit 40, it's the testimony in the same case of Mr. Kumar.
Right.
Exhibit 2 was the Moody's exhibit from February 2015. I will move Exhibit 2.
Any objection?
No objection.
It's admitted.
Exhibit 31 is the EIA report that goes out to 2030.
Any objection?
I don't believe you asked Mr. Heaps any questions about this.
Thought I did.
You skipped a couple.
Yeah, I see.
Because he didn't recognize them, hadn't seen them, and then I don't know if this was one of them.
Yeah, he was familiar with EIA. It was the other.
There were no questions based on my notes regarding Exhibit 31, which is Table A12, petroleum and other liquid prices. So this natural gas is not, he was not asked any questions on this document.
Yeah, when I asked him whether the EIA was predicting that prices would reach $100 a barrel in around 2030, and he said yes.
Any objection otherwise?
No objection otherwise.
Okay, then it's admitted.
We went through Exhibit 32 with him, which was the Goldman Sachs prediction. So I'll move Exhibit 32.
Any objection?
No objection.
Admitted.
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think we're ready for a cross for Mr. Sinclair.
And first I'll swear you in, Mr. Sinclair. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Cross-examination?
Mr. Dumont?
No question.
Oh, that's right. Mr. Gray?
Good afternoon, Mr. Sinclair. Mr. Sinclair, my understanding is that on or prior to July 2nd, 2014, you would have reviewed and approved estimates. Is that correct?
I'm going to help you a little bit and just give you a little timeline. I joined Vermont Gas in March of 2014 as Vice President of Sales and Marketing. And in the July timeframe of 2014, I joined what's called the Executive Steering Committee overseeing the project. So that timeframe. And then I assumed what's called the executive sponsor role on behalf of Vermont Gas for the project in, it was right middle third week of September of 2014. So just to help give you a frame of reference.
Sure. My understanding is that there was an October 7th, 2014 quarterly cost estimate. Are you aware of that?
I should be familiar with it. I do not have that with me.
Do you know who would have provided review and approval of the October 7th, 2014 quarterly cost estimate?
If you could show me that, I could confirm that for you.
Let's see if
I
I can do
apologize.
that.
It's been admitted already to this docket, hasn't it?
It's not in this document.
Page 7.
This doesn't have a number. Does it have
We'll just give 5.
Which document is it? We can check to see if it's been admitted.
VGS would have produced and provided, and that it's part of this proceeding.
If I can clarify, it's
Yeah.
not. It's a quarterly cost update that was submitted on October 7th. There was submitted to the Public Service
Okay.
Board.
the department?
And the department. The quarterly cost update for April 2015 was a exhibit to Mr. Rome's rebuttal testimony.
Yeah, so they've been filed with the board, but they're not in evidence. So you need to, if you want to have them in evidence, you either move them into evidence.
Okay.
The January and the April 2014 ones are in evidence, if that's helpful.
Thank you.
15, excuse me, January and April 15.
So, I don't have the exhibit, so I'll ask one or two more questions. So, with respect to the October 7th, 2014 quarterly estimate, I believe your testimony, you don't recollect it today?
I'm sorry, recollect that document.
You don't?
I don't without seeing that document, I really do need to see that. There's many filings that we've made, and I'm sorry, but it would be helpful to have the document.
Would VGS be able to provide a copy to the witness? Do you have it with you today?
I have a copy. I'm not, the scope of Mr. Sinclair's testimony relates to the current cost estimate. We have one copy with us. I don't have an extra copy for the witness.
I really just want him to look at it
Yeah.
and refresh his memory, that's all I'm asking.
Bear with me.
Please, take your time.
Okay, I've reviewed it.
All right. Do you know who would have reviewed and approved that quarterly estimate, the October 7th, 2014 quarterly estimate?
I would have been involved in the review and approval of this quarterly estimate.
Okay, and when you say involved, does that mean that you were the person with final authority to review and approve, or was it a number of individuals?
I'm just thinking back to the process we were using at that time. I apologize.
Sure, no problem.
I would say at that point in time, it did not get submitted without my approval.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Ms. Levine, do you have questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sinclair.
Good afternoon.
Do you have a copy of your testimony in front of you?
I do.
Thank you. Regarding your testimony from January 2015, at page 3, you provide a summary of the analysis offered in support of the December Phase 1 cost estimate. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you did not yourself conduct any independent analysis regarding that cost estimate. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And regarding your January 15 testimony on page 4, you discuss customer fuel choices. see that?
Bear with me, could you give
I
me
think
a line?
it's lines 15 to 16.
Okay, let me just read that, please.
And you agree that your comparison is only between natural gas and oil or propane, is that correct?
I do agree.
Okay. And prior to working at Vermont Gas Systems, you were a communications manager for Entergy Corporation, is that correct?
That's correct.
And was that position based in Vermont?
Actually, it was based at my home, believe it or not, in Western Massachusetts. I was covering a very broad area for them, including Massachusetts, Vermont, and into New York State.
And in that position, did you have any oversight or responsibilities for Entergy's cost estimates regarding the Vermont Yankee facility?
I did not.
And Mr. Gregg just asked you some questions regarding the October 7th, 2014 quarterly cost estimate.
Yes.
I don't have that with me. I think it would be helpful for that to be included in the record. Could I bring a copy tomorrow and offer it as evidence? I just don't have it with me. But I think his testimony is kind of left hanging out there without that document.
Any objection to proceeding that way?
We don't have an objection to the document being included into the
Okay.
record. I guess I'm not clear on whether there's gonna be follow-up questions. Mr. Sinclair is expected to be done today.
Did you want him to be here tomorrow?
No,
Or
I
you
just wanted that document to be admitted into evidence, and I
Right.
do not have it with me, so I can't offer it.
So is that okay to admit it tomorrow morning?
That's fine.
Okay, great.
Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So, you reminded us when you joined Vermont Gas Systems, and it coincides with the decision at some point relative to the third cost estimate to switch the methodology to those standards established by the Association for the Advancement of Cost Engineering, or ACE.
Correct.
Was that, which of course resulted in the December 2014 most recent cost estimate. Was that coincidental with your arrival, or were you instrumental in making that decision?
I would say that as a member of the steering committee overseeing the project in the July-August timeframe and discussions that we had, it certainly was something we were looking at to see if that was warranted and what additional value, if you will, that would add. And then the decision was made by former CEO Gilbert with respect to actually going forward with that approach.
And can you say why that switch was made?
I think my understanding at the time is it reflects, if you read, I was here for a remand testimony, and his testimony was that any future re-estimating we would do would employ that type of a methodology, meaning ACE. And I, as the incoming person responsible for the project at the executive level, am familiar with that process in my prior life with Kinder Morgan. And so I felt that having familiarity with that certainly resonated with me as an approach that has a lot of proven time, if you will, at least with Kinder Morgan as the methodology that they use.
Any follow-up? Okay, thank you, Mr. Sinclair.
Thank you.
I think we're ready for our next witness.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
The witness is free to be cross-examined.
Great, thanks. Mr. Gray, do you have
I
a question?
apologize, Chair, I should have notified you earlier. Based upon what we've heard so far, we don't have any cross-examination, so I regret on having had the witness make his way
That's
to
right.
the chair.
And Ms. Levine, you don't have any either?
No.
Okay.
Don't think
I'm
I
in
have
the wrong
one.
spot, yeah. But we have some, so don't worry.
Hi, Mr. Sinclair. I'm Mike Townsend.
Hi, Mike.
At page 3 of your testimony, in lines 1 through 7, you state that to reduce the impact of the Trans-Canada pipeline tolls, in 2007, VGS initiated a shift in supply purchasing away from the Empress receipt point in Western Canada to the Dawn Parkway markets in Ontario, and that this shift will reduce the delivered cost of gas to Vermont. Please explain why this shift will reduce the delivered cost of gas to Vermont, and the degree to which, if at all, the shift has reduced the delivered cost of gas to Vermont since the shift was initiated in 2007.
To start with, the Trans-Canada tolling is based on a mileage component. So the farther you're moving natural gas on the system, the higher the toll. So moving from the Empress, which is out on eastern, the Alberta border to Vermont, is going to be at a higher toll than going from the Dawn Parkway, which is around the Great Lakes or to the Toronto area. So by moving from to a shorter distance, you're actually reducing your Trans-Canada toll. The actual impact is actually two components. One is the Trans-Canada toll, the other is the commodity. It's actually the combination of the two. And over the last several years, the combination of the two provided the Parkway point actually has a lower toll in total than the Empress point. So that's why we've been migrating that service over to short haul. The impact is actually reflected in a number of our PGA adjustments over the years. I don't have a exact number, but when you look at the PGAs over the last several years, purchase gas adjustment, it's a regulatory mechanism to pass along gas costs, and we've had several rate decreases over the last several years, and that impact has been reflected in those.
Can you monetize what those advantages have been?
I would have to go back to calculate that, but at this moment I do not have those.
If VGS is still buying Canadian gas, wouldn't the price of the Dawn Parkway reflect the seller's cost of getting the gas to that point?
That's correct.
So would that include the Trans-Canada pipeline tolls?
Not necessarily. The Dawn Parkway has been, first off, it's the most liquid point in the Eastern Canadian market. And what we've seen over the last, I'll say 5 to 10 years, is more supply coming in from the Rockies, from the Marcellus. So it's not strictly a cost of Empress-based supply plus Trans-Canada tolls. It's a combination of many different supply bases coming together in one market.
Further down on page 3, at lines 13 to 19, you respond to the concerns articulated in Ms. Pizer's testimony that changes in the Trans-Canada pipeline policy and tariffs threaten capacity in Vermont by stating that VGS has secured 6,000 gigajoules per day of Trans-Canada capacity starting in 2016 and an additional 10,000 gigajoules per day starting in 2017, and that this will be adequate to serve firm and interruptible markets for several years after expansion of the VGS transmission pipeline system. Why are these amounts adequate?
When we contract on the Trans-Canada system, we're looking at our firm market requirements and looking to serve existing and projected firm loads based on the coldest day that we think that we're going to have to serve, which is what we consider our design day. So as we're looking out into the Trans-Canada open season to secure capacity, we want to look out and say, what's the worst case scenario that's based on historical day, and we want to secure enough capacity to make sure that we can serve those customers. Any demand that's above that will be used to serve any demand on Vermont Gas's system that's above that level would be attributed to an interruptible customer, where we could actually curtail their load and they would move to an alternate fuel.
Okay, so what is the average gigajoule per day requirement on an average day and on a peak day?
It's all weather dependent. Most of our customers are residential, and when it gets cold out, they use more natural gas. On a typical, I know a design day is somewhere right now around 75,000 MCF. On an average winter day, again, I'm just going on my recollection, it's probably around 60 to 65,000.
Okay, I think I'm going to ask you to come back with an answer on this in gigajoules, because that's what your testimony is in. And to verify specifically the data request is for the current gigajoules per day requirements on an average day and on a peak day currently, and then what is projected as the gigajoules per day requirements after the completion, should the project continue to Middlebury on an average day and on a peak day.
We can get that.
Good. Thank you. Ms. Pizer also refers to the possibility of a general shortage of capacity on the Trans-Canada pipeline. To your knowledge, are other companies concerned about available capacity?
I think that when you look at any transportation market, when you look out into the future, you're always worried about having enough to meet your growth. I think the situation that Mrs. Pizer referred to was prior to the RH 2014 decision, where there was more uncertainty on the Trans-Canada market of whether Trans-Canada would actually install and award new capacity. So I think that there's naturally an uncertainty when you're looking at transportation capacity, but I think that the issue that Mrs. Pizer noted is no longer there.
Well, wasn't part of the concern the fact that the Trans-Canada pipeline folks are talking about converting part of the pipeline to shipping oil?
That's correct. That was the Energy East project, and the concern with that one was many companies would utilize interruptible service on Trans-Canada, and which means that you would go out on the day or the month when you needed the capacity, and you would contract for that. Trans-Canada would, when they're doing their toll setting, they're looking out over the next year or two and looking at the firm contracts, and that's what they're constructing for. So when they were looking out and designing the Energy East project, they were looking at capacity that no one was contracted for out year 2, 3, or 4, and saying, if no one's contracting for it, why don't I use that in some other manner that would actually help existing shippers? So if you're using interruptible transportation on Trans-Canada, then that was at risk. Vermont Gas does not use that service. We use 100% firm transportation on Trans-Canada.
Thank you. Later on in your testimony, you talk about Mr. Palmer's safety concerns related to frost heat that are discussed in the January 2015 pipeline and gas journal. Specifically,
I'm sorry,
Mr.
Mike, I didn't hear. Discussed in January 2015 what?
Pipeline and gas journal.
Thank you.
Specifically, Mr. Palmer refers to Figure 5 of that article, which presents a chart of the rate of cold weather incidents normalized by mileage, in which Mr. Palmer characterizes as off the charts at 25.8 relative rate of occurrence normalized for mileage for Vermont. Is this familiar to you?
Yes, it is.
Is it your testimony that the Vermont data that resulted in this off-the-charts graphic is derived from only 2 incidents, one in 1989 and one in 2003?
That's correct.
Okay. And that would be, other than determining that there were only these 2 incidents due to cold weather events in the last 45 years, have you otherwise investigated to determine the source of that data? I mean, did you do more looking than finding out that there was just the 2?
Yes, I actually contacted the author of the article and discussed a little bit of the methodology and how he came up with the output in his article on the chart.
And what did he tell you, if you remember?
He actually said that if one of the issues that we have is we're a very small LDC, and he said that if Hawaii had 1 incident, we would actually look much better than Hawaii.
So it's because of the mileage issue?
Yes. Yes.
So you are only aware of the 2 cold weather incidents that have occurred in Vermont?
That's correct. That's all we have. We went back to our records back to 1970, and we only confirmed 2. We only found 2.
One of the things that Mr. Palmer alludes to is the fact that soil conditions are different in Addison County materially from in Chittenden and Franklin counties. Does your examination point to any conclusions in that regard? I know you responded to his testimony. Did you respond to that issue?
No, I did not.
Do you think that frost heave incidents are more of a safety issue, or are they an environmental issue?
I'm not sure that I understand the question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I would understand the question to, in terms of the environmental have to be relating to leakage of methane or other things that can, that contribute to global warming. Could you answer the question with that in mind?
Yeah, in that regard, what I'll say is that frost heaves are a concern for any below-ground installation, and as the author noted in here, if you have a strong connection between components and a ductile material, it actually is able to withstand the stresses of frost, and the current code, DOT, recommends or dictates 36 inches of cover, so as long as the pipe is buried to code, in our experience with our current system, is that having a strong ductile system, there's less of a risk of frost incidents.
In your testimony on May 27 on page 5, line 10, you say that VGS will utilize high-density polyethylene and a fusing process to connect distribution components to ensure a ductile and continuous system. And but then in the next sentence, and I'm wondering if you could explain this, you say that all steel pipe sections shall be welded. So is only some of it polyethylene and other parts steel, or is it at the intersections? I don't really understand why you're mentioning steel if you also say that you'll be utilizing polyethylene.
In the project, the ARNGP distribution system will be 100% polyethylene. The only areas where we'll be using steel is there's large industrial customer meter sets. We'll have a steel riser, but essentially the proposed distribution system would be all high-density polyethylene. In our current system, in many communities such as Burlington, St. Albans, Milton, we have systems that were put in the 70s and 80s that were steel. So on our current system we have steel, but in the new system it'll be high-density polyethylene.
Any follow-up to our questions? Any redirects?
I'm just thinking about the last, I just want to make sure that the record is accurate in terms of the steel, the portion of the project that is steel. Is there any portion on the transmission system that is steel?
Yes, it's a good point. The transmission line, it will be 100%, it's all steel. What I was referencing was specific to the distribution. The transmission line is steel,
Okay.
no polyethylene, high-density polyethylene.
Does that change any portion of the question that Ms. Cheney asked you concerning the safety of the project or the project's compliance with code?
No, it does not.
I have nothing further.
Just to make sure I understand what you just testified to, so what you're saying is that generally the transmission pipeline will be steel, but when you talked about polyethylene, high-density polyethylene on page 5, you were talking about elements of the distribution system that might be prone to the potential for frost heave.
That's correct. The article in reference was dealing with distribution systems and not transmission systems.
Thank you.
Any follow-up? Okay, thank you, Mr. Sinclair. We're ready for our next witness?
And I'll just remind you, Ms. Simollardes, that you remain under oath.
Thank you.
We ready?
We're ready. The witness is available.
Thank you. I think, Mr. Dumont, you have a question?
I do.
Okay.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to start with a question about your background. I understand you have a bachelor's degree in economics?
I do.
No advanced degrees.
I have a master's in business administration from St. Michael's College.
Do you have any formal education in NPV analysis?
I have used NPV analysis throughout my professional career And I'm sure it was covered in some of my coursework, either in my undergrad or my master's program.
So you've been doing NPV analysis since when?
I've been doing regulated rate work since the, this is a good question, since the probably late 80s. And most of that work would have entailed at some degree some level of NPV analysis.
Have you received any formal education in using the REMI or Redine model?
No, I've not used those models.
So in your testimony in this matter, you have not personally used REMI or Redine?
No, I have not.
So when you do NPV analysis, is it basically spreadsheet analysis?
Correct.
If you could turn to our book of exhibits, class exhibits.
Which I failed to bring up with me. May I? It's sitting right there.
Quite a few exhibits to go through with you. First, if you could look at Exhibit 3 and Exhibit 6.
I have them.
Okay, so in Exhibit 3, it's DPS VGS 1-1. You were asked in question B, as in baby, what is the net present value, 20 years, of project costs that ratepayers could be responsible for under the new cost estimate? And did you answer, we have not calculated the NPV value of the range of potential rate impacts that ratepayers could be responsible for?
That's what that response says, yes.
And is that still true?
Correct. The operative word there was that ratepayers could be responsible for under the new estimate. And my response was, we have not calculated the NP value of the range of potential rate impacts that ratepayers could be responsible for.
So you don't know the low end bracket, and you don't know the high end bracket, correct?
The low end bracket would be 0, and the high end bracket, no, I don't know.
Exhibit 6, you were asked, please provide in native format all workbooks used to calculate rate impact of the project, and you answered, see attachments, etc. And then you added, please note that the rate impacts shown in these attachments are not included in the economic benefit analyses. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
So, as of when you answered this on April 22nd, 2015, the company had conducted no economic analyses of the rate impacts. Correct?
No, I don't think that that is actually correct. My exhibit to my January 15th, 2015 pre-file testimony was a replication of an analysis that the board had asked Vermont Gas to conduct, both in the initial phase of this proceeding and in the first remand. And walking through that, there are, in fact, expressions of potential rate impact, and they were, in fact, replicated at this level. The point here was this is not a rate proposal, it was a replication of a prior analysis using the current cost estimates that we have before us in this proceeding.
I'm sure my question was faulty, so let me start over. I'm asking you about economic benefit analysis. As of April 22nd, the company had performed no economic benefit analysis that included rate impacts, correct?
I don't mean to be difficult in answering this.
Yes, you do.
Only if you're meaning to be difficult in asking it. No. The analysis that I did in my March 27th testimony deducted from the economic benefits of the project, the total project cost, which has some degree of rate impact in it, because those are dollars that will ultimately be recovered from ratepayers. So I know you're looking for a yes or no answer, and I just don't think I can give you one.
You testified on behalf of the company in the proceedings leading up to the December 23rd, 2013 order, correct?
I did.
Would it be fair to say that you coordinated the witnesses?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, I'll ask a different question. You were fully aware of what the other witnesses testified to, correct?
That's correct.
And Mr. Carr did an economic benefit analysis that did include rate impacts, correct?
Yes, he did.
So if we use the term economic benefit analysis, as including REMI or Redine or Implan or some other computer program that's designed to look at societal economic benefits. As of April 22nd, the company had not performed such an analysis that considered rate impacts, correct? Of the new project, of the new cost.
At the 153.6, we did not do the same type of analysis that had been done before, but I think it's very important to point out that there is not a how-to manual or a cookbook that the Public Service Board or the state of Vermont uses for economic benefit, which is why you have several people in this proceeding that have independently calculated economic benefits. They've come up with different numbers, but have determined that there is a economic benefit of the project. Mr. Carr was an independent witness. The company did not direct his testimony or his analysis about how to do the analysis. I did not do it this way this time.
Was it your decision, Ms. Simollardes, not to include that analysis that addressed the cost increases?
I am the Vermont Gas witness speaking to economic benefits of this project with the support of Mr. Heaps on construction-related benefits and Mr. Bluestein on the quantification of greenhouse gas emissions. When we submitted a cost estimate on December 19th, we turned around very quickly on January 15th with testimony in this case, and I did the analysis that you see there. In the supplemental testimony that I did in March, I used the board's remand order in this case as a guide for what the board had considered the first time around, and I replicated that here.
My question was, who made the decision not to submit to the board economic analysis using REMI, Redine, or some other similar program that included rate impact analysis?
That implies there was a decision made not to do that, where in fact the decision was in the positive. We decided what to do. You're not going to find something where we said we are not going to do that. Instead, I used the board's order from the first remand as a model for what they were looking for at that time, and I replicated it here.
Did you call Mr. Carr and see if he was available?
I did not, because for two reasons. One, Mr. Heaps was our witness in phase two, and phase two was a going concern at that time, and I didn't want dueling economic witnesses, and frankly, I said it before, Mr. Carr was an independent witness, and there were aspects of Mr. Carr's testimony I didn't agree with.
Isn't that the point?
Not if it's my choice to who to hire next time.
So you selected witnesses according to the results that you agreed with or you did not agree with?
Mr. Carr was not our witness in phase two. I did not want dueling economists, if you will. I don't know that they would have come to different conclusions, but there were parts of Mr. Carr's testimony for mostly around conversion costs. It was just, I didn't agree with his calculation.
What expertise, education, or training do you have to base your disagreement with Mr. Carr?
I work for the gas company, and we have experience in customer conversion costs.
So you agreed with the methodology used by Mr. Heaps?
Mr. Heaps did a very narrow analysis for us. He did construction-related benefits.
Did you agree with his methodology?
I didn't critique Mr. Heaps' methodology. I said a moment ago, I am not familiar with the Redine or REMI model. I really wouldn't have the ability to critique Mr. Heaps' model.
Well, you said you didn't agree with what Mr. Carr did.
I didn't agree with an input to the model, the conversion cost input to the model.
You did not agree with the inputs he used, so you felt you had the expertise to evaluate the job that he did, correct?
No, I didn't say that either. I said I disagreed with an input to his model.
Because you disagreed with the way a professional economist inputted data into a model that you don't know how to use. You decided not to use them again in the next case. Is that what you're telling us?
No, what I'm saying is I had Mr. Heaps as my witness in phase two, and I wanted the same witness for concurrent proceedings.
Have you had any training in how to use the REMI model?
None,
Have you had any training in how to use the red eye model?
none.
But you were sure he made incorrect inputs.
It was an input on the total amount of conversion cost per customer. And I didn't say he was wrong, I said I disagreed with it.
So you didn't call him when it came time to address the economic benefit or economic benefit analysis of the project at the new cost?
I did not.
If you could turn to cross exhibit 4. This was a discovery answer to the department. The question was, does the Addison County energy savings estimated on page 3 of Ms. Simollardes' testimony include costs associated with conversion to natural gas that was borne by customers? And the answer was no. Those are direct energy savings and do not include conversion costs. Did I read that correctly?
You did.
So the pre-filed testimony on page 3 of energy savings did not take into account conversion costs.
It did not.
If you turn to exhibit 7, cross 7. Again, this is an answer to a department discovery request.
I'm there.
The question was, please explain how VGS expects the costs of phase 1 to be allocated to each customer class. Specifically, how will the recovery through rates of phase 1 expenditures change the current allocation of costs between customer classes? In answer, please specify how infrastructure costs are distributed across customer classes in a before phase 1 scenario and how this compares to an after phase 1 scenario. And your answer was, Vermont Gas has not performed a cost allocation study to assess the allocation of phase 1 to each customer class, nor has it proposed a specific rate proposal for the project. However, generally speaking, in the absence of a cost allocation study, any rate change would be implemented evenly across the board, with each customer class increasing or decreasing by the same percentage. Did I read that correctly?
You did.
Is that still, is that the answer you would give today?
It is.
I want to talk about project costs now, and this is addressed by Exhibit 8. Exhibit 8 is DTS VGS 1-6. You were asked, the revised cost estimate is stated to be approximately $153.6 million. Does this include distribution level investment? If not, what is the revised cost estimate for the distribution level investment necessary to provide service to customers? Will VGS ultimately request that this cost be borne by Vermont ratepayers? And did you answer, the $153.6 million does not include the distribution mains within Virgins and Middlebury. However, the economic analyses do include these investments. The distribution investments are assumed to be $5.8 million plus $1,600 per service. VGS will request rate recovery of distribution costs. Did I read that correctly, although too fast?
You read it correctly.
So the total project cost is actually not 153.6. It's 153.6 plus 5.8 million in distribution investments plus $1,600 per service, and you're expecting over 3,000 service drops, correct?
One moment, please. That's correct, and that is actually shown on Table 2 of my March 27th testimony. You'll see the total project costs, including distribution, network, and services, $162 million, growing to $162.5 million, and that represents the additional service costs as customers come on.
So the total project cost is over $162 million. And you intend to recover from ratepayers, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Turn to cross 9. This refers to DPS. This is DPS VGS 1-7. You were asked, are there costs other than transmission, estimated at $153.6 million, and distribution construction costs associated with a project that Vermont Gas would seek recovery for in rates if the project was completed such as operations and maintenance not related to transmission and distribution investment, service drops, or other costs? And your answer was, Vermont Gas will request recovery of the costs required to provide safe and reliable natural gas service to its customers. Vermont Gas has included an estimate of additional operations and maintenance costs in its analysis, and then you refer to Exhibit 1-1.1 and 1-1.2. And wondering if you could either walk us through that or tell us what the operations and maintenance cost is that you will be asking to recover in rate base.
Those are actually two separate questions. I can tell you what we put in the analysis that is reflected in 1.1, which give me a moment to find it, but I believe it started at $500,000 and it escalated at inflation.
It escalates to about $1 million a year, does it not?
It does. But the amount that we will reflect in rates, or request to be reflected in rates, subject to Public Service Board approval, will be whatever the cost is that's necessary to provide safe and reliable natural gas service to our customers.
So is it $1 million a year cumulative each year?
It's an ongoing maintenance expense, so it's not $1 million plus $1 million plus $1 million, it's $500,000 a year escalated at inflation, is what was reflected in this model. What the cost that we will put in rates or request to be recovered in rates will be whatever is necessary to render safe and adequate service.
And the reason you say it that way is because there might be offsetting savings that could cause it to be less than that number that's on that table, or there could be other reasons why it might be more?
That's correct. We don't have service down there yet. We made an estimate of a value for operation and maintenance. But what the actual cost will be will depend on our experience when we get there, what kind of synergies we can get from our existing customers, what kind of synergies we can get with other markets we're expanding into, Bristol, New Haven, Moncton. This was a number that we use in analysis. It's not a number that we're planning on reflecting in rates until we know what the costs are.
Yeah.
May I just so I understand, you said this is on Exhibit 1-1 or attachment?
It's on.
It's a discovery exhibit, not a...
No, it's actually shown in my exhibit. It's shown in my January 15th testimony. It's the, it's got a really long name. It's called Attachment Sub 1-1515 PSB VGS 1-1. That consists of, I'm sorry, those pages aren't numbered. It looks like maybe 10 pages, maybe a little less. You can see it on the first page of that exhibit. There's a line entitled O&M expense, and it starts at $503,000 and it escalates thereafter.
Okay, and that's one I wanted to make sure I understood, because you were saying that you started at 500,000, escalated by inflation. The first couple of years you're escalating at something greater
Than inflation. I just noticed that. I need to check that, what it's escalating at.
And the O&M expense by year 35 is $2.5 million.
Correct, on this exhibit. I'll check what it's escalating at.
Are you doing that? Are you going to do that work later?
I don't have the,
Oh, okay, I thought you were trying to do that right now.
no,
Okay,
sorry.
all right, sorry. If you turn to Exhibit 10, this is a DPS question. It's question 1-8. It asks you for your analysis related to the greenhouse gas reductions of 27 million in your pre-file testimony. Did you see that?
Yes.
And in your answer, A, you wrote, the greenhouse gas reductions assume that 70% of the residential and commercial load displaces number 2 fuel oil, and all the industrial load is replacing number 2 fuel oil except for 1 million gallons of propane. Did I read that correct?
You did.
So the $27 million that you attributed to greenhouse gas reductions, that assumes replacement of number 2 fuel oil, correct? Except for the $1 million of propane.
The greenhouse gas analysis only reflects the 70% that's related to fuel oil. We did not calculate or take any credit for greenhouse gas analysis, greenhouse gas avoided emissions associated with propane.
You assumed that the customers that are now being served by the so-called gas island in Millbury, for purposes of greenhouse gas analysis, are being served by fuel oil.
For purposes of this calculation, yes, that's what we did.
And if you could turn to Exhibit 20, it's a Palmer VGS Art request to admit 1-13. You were asked to admit that VGS paid for the Middlebury Gas Island's associated distribution pipeline network, and your answer included the statement, the Middlebury Gas Island's associated distribution network will be paid for over time and rates paid by Vermont Gas customers, correct?
That is Vermont Gas's expectation.
So can you describe the gas island that's addressed in the answer to the Palmer request to admit? Tell us about it.
I will take you as far as I can, and then there may be others that are better versed in the details of the gas island. But there is a compressed natural gas skid, I'll call it decompression station, located at Agrimark. Then the gas comes out of that CNG decompression skid, and it goes into a preliminary distribution network that runs from Agrimark to Middlebury College. And off of that, as we sit here right now, Agrimark, Middlebury College, and Vermont Cider are, actually I'm not sure if Vermont Cider is actually burning as we speak, but are expected to take gas service off of that energy island.
You can turn to Exhibit 27. This is an answer to the CLF question 1-8, and this may be in evidence already. You were asked to identify all analysis and produce all documents regarding how VGS accounted for or evaluated financial savings or emissions reductions for customers currently served by compressed natural gas. And you objected, all analysis is overly broad and vague. Without waiving the objection, the financial savings and emissions reductions do not take into account the use of compressed natural gas, because those customers will use compressed natural gas only for the period before the pipeline is in operation, correct?
That's what that response says, yes.
But the baseline, what the world would look like without this project, is that the CNG is in place right now, correct?
CNG is in place right now, but I do not believe that that is the appropriate way to look at this project. CNG is not available for the 3,000 residential and commercial customers in Virgins and Middlebury. And if Vermont Gas were not going to be serving Virgins and Middlebury through pipeline, I don't know whether or not we would have constructed a distribution network there. And if we didn't construct the distribution network there, I don't know whether each of those customers individually would have done compressed natural gas service. We heard Agrimark testify in the first phase of this
So
proceeding.
excuse me if I'm going to interrupt you.
Yes?
If you were going to get into what testimony was in another case, in not this case, or it was at the early phase of this case?
It was
or
the early
cert
phase
case?
of this case.
Right.
It's on the
So,
transcript.
I'm not going to object if you want to just say your recollection is what there was testimony in the other case, we can go look at the transcript.
That's fine. My recollection is Agrimark testified in this case that they were using CNG only as a bridge fuel until the presence of the pipeline.
And we know that IPC has CNG, correct?
International Paper?
Yes.
Yes, International Paper is using CNG now.
After phase 2 was canceled, they put in CNG facilities, correct?
Yes, they did.
So is it your testimony that you think that if this project is canceled, Agrimark will stop using the CNG facilities that are in place?
I won't speak to what Agrimark is doing. I'm saying what I believe the basis of the appropriate analysis for this case is what would have happened but for our pipeline. And I don't know that Vermont Gas would have constructed a distribution network down there for the purposes of CNG. And I don't think looking at this case with CNG today is the appropriate way to do it.
I'm going to submit to you that's actually up to the board to decide what the appropriate analysis is.
You asked, I was expressing my opinion. I agree with that. It is the board's decision.
And I'm asking you for a fact answer, which is, in fact, you don't believe that if this project doesn't receive continuing approval, that Agrimark is going to rip out the CNG facilities and stop using them, do you?
I don't know what Agrimark is going to do, and I'm not going to testify to that.
I'm asking you what your belief is as a utility executive in the gas business for how many years? A lot, many years.
Many years. I believe Agrimark will make the appropriate economic decision for Agrimark.
Are they saving money right now by using CNG as compared to fuel oil?
They are saving money as compared to fuel oil, but they will save in the order of $6 to $7 an MMBTU more when the pipeline comes.
So they're saving maybe $1 million a year right now by using CNG?
I don't know what they're saving today.
Well, their testimony in the past, wasn't it, that they would save $3 million a year by converting to natural gas?
That was something that they calculated back in 2010, which is why I'm reluctant to say what their savings today would be.
Their savings from having converted already to CNG are in the around $1 million to $1.5 million, are they not, annually?
I've already said that I don't know what CNG is saving
Give us
today.
your best opinion.
My best opinion is when they go to pipeline, they'll save $6 an MMBTU more than they're paying today. That's the number I know.
Give us your best opinion as a Vermont Gas executive as to the savings that Agrimark has right now.
I do not know what Agrimark's oil prices are. That is why I can't answer the question. I'm not being difficult. I don't know what Agrimark is paying for fuel oil. That is why I can't answer the question.
Give us a ballpark.
I can tell you what roughly I think they're paying for natural gas, and you can make your own opinion about what they may be paying for fuel oil.
If you don't want to answer the question, I guess you're not going to give us an opinion on what their savings are right now.
I am not.
Okay. Do you think that's relevant?
How much they're saving now?
Yes.
I think what's more relevant is what they will save when the pipeline is built.
Yes, we know you feel that way.
Yes.
Do you disagree with the definition of baseline that the Office of Management and Budget uses in the exhibit that Mr. Heaps presented?
I actually didn't look at the definition of baseline. So I can't write, I just didn't look at it.
Were you here when he testified?
Yes,
Did you listen to what his testimony was?
I did. That doesn't mean I'm prepared to testify to what that document said, though.
Well, the definition of the baseline, according to the United States government, is what the world would look like if the project did not go forward. If this project did not go forward, is it your testimony that Agrimark would cease using CNG?
My testimony is I don't know what Agrimark would do.
Mr. Freeman, we've been over this many times, so can you move on?
I will.
Thanks. We understand your point, but she doesn't know, she doesn't know.
Does UTC have CNG?
I believe UTC does have CNG. It is not served through an energy island. It is not a transaction Vermont Gas is involved in.
What is
I'm
UTC?
sorry, can you repeat that again?
I believe UTC is utilizing CNG, but it is not through an energy island, and it's not a transaction Vermont Gas is directly involved in.
And UTC is what we used to call the Ed Quittridge Aerospace,
Correct.
the largest employer in Virginia.
Correct. Oh, actually, I don't know if they're the largest employer in Virginia. I shouldn't have said correct so quickly. That makes sense to me, but I don't know that.
Turn to cross-exhibit 44. You recognize cross-exhibit 44?
It's a page from a Vermont Gas PowerPoint presentation.
Is this an accurate copy of the Vermont Gas PowerPoint presentation?
It looks like a Vermont Gas PowerPoint presentation. What presentation it came from, I don't know off the top of my head.
Are the numbers on it accurate? And we'll go through them one by one. It says, the Addison County market consists of 3,000 residential and business customers and a potential load of 1 billion cubic feet.
I think there should be an approximate in front of that 1 BCF. It's an order of magnitude accurate.
Okay. So that's accurate. And it says 1,000 Virgins and 2,000 Middlebury. Is that accurate?
I actually don't have the split by communities with me, but again, order of magnitude, that looks about right.
Largest customer, Cabot Cheese, 372,000 million cubic feet. That's what we're calling Agrimark now, correct?
Yes, when you see Cabot, that is Agrimark. If you're going to ask me if each of these MCF are accurate, I can save you time going down the list. I'm not going to be able to tell you if they are or they aren't as I sit here right now. I can check them. I don't have the loads by customer memorized.
Are these approximately accurate?
For Cabot, Middlebury College, Goodrich, I would say yes. The other 5 under other business, I'm not familiar with those. Just given how small some of those are, this must have been a presentation that our marketing department worked on. I'm not personally familiar with those. Porter Hospital I probably have, but Addison County Asphalt, Otter Creek, Connor Homes, Jobs Corps, I'm not familiar with those customers.
So, looking at this exhibit, we know that Cabot Cheese has CNG, correct?
Cabot Cheese is using CNG.
And Middlebury College, same?
Middlebury College just started using CNG recently.
Goodrich?
Correct.
How about Porter Hospital?
I don't know.
Addison County Asphalt, are they getting CNG?
I don't know. Not to my knowledge, but I don't know.
Otter Creek, Connor Homes, or Job Corps?
I've already said I'm not familiar with those customers. I can tell you that at least those last 4, for purposes of our analysis, we did not assume those were interruptible customers, and anybody receiving CNG service is an interruptible customer. So for especially somebody around 2,000 MCF or 4,000 MCF, that is materially smaller than other interruptible customers on our system.
Do you agree that approximately half of the demand projected in Exhibit 44 is being met already through CNG?
It is being met with CNG right now. Whether or not it will be met with CNG on a long-term basis, I don't know. And we're not getting, again, we're not getting the full economic benefit of the pipeline with CNG because it is not available to residential or commercial customers, and it doesn't provide the full economic value to the customers that are using CNG, nor does it provide the same environmental benefits because there's still trucking associated with it.
If you turn to cross Exhibit 21. This is an answer to one of Mr. Palmer's questions. Request to omit 1-18. Admit that VGS claimed GHG emission reduction NPV benefit includes VGS or NG Advantage customers who are currently receiving CNG by either direct tanker deliveries or else through the Middlebury Gas Island Service Distribution Network. Can you admit that?
I did.
Turn to Exhibit 41, page 4 of Exhibit 41. Do you agree that Mr. Nagel's analysis of the benefits of the pipeline are presented here, and he assumed that CNG would not happen. I'm sorry, let me start over. He assumed that CNG and the project were mutually exclusive. If you had one, you would not have the other.
He assumed that for the life of the project. I don't think at the time this was written that the use of CNG as a temporary alternative until the project arrived was considered, but this testimony does appear to have them as mutually exclusive.
If you could turn to Exhibit 42, which is Mr. Poor's testimony of the same date, August 14th, 2013.
Also in this docket, correct?
Yes.
What page, please?
It's page 4 of Exhibit 42.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I'm sorry, page 11 of Exhibit 42. Lines 2 and 3. Mr. Poor testified, in the LNG and CNG scenarios, it was assumed that the proposed project would not be constructed. Correct?
That's what that testimony says.
So, from the department's point of view, in the initial proceedings, the department assumed that if you had this project, you would not have CNG. If you had CNG, you would not have this project. Correct?
That appears to be what the department assumed at that time.
To speed this up, I'm going to ask you to look at 22, 24, 25, and 26, then I'll ask you a collective question.
I'm sorry, 22 through?
22, 24, 25, and 26.
22.
Yes.
And 25?
And 26.
And 26.
25 and 26.
Okay. I've read them.
Now, am I correct that Vermont Gas has not analyzed the energy savings of the project as compared to the installation of cold climate heat pumps at each home you propose to serve?
We have not done an analysis of the project compared to cold climate heat pumps. I do point out, however, that even at, quote, full saturation under our analysis, there's still, well, somewhere around 30%. There's 30% after 20 years, so it probably declines after that. So there is certainly room in that market for customers that choose to use a cold climate heat pump to do so. I don't view this analysis and the analysis of cold climate heat pumps to be mutually exclusive.
So the company did not analyze the energy savings or the greenhouse gas reductions or the NPV of the project as compared to installation of cold climate heat pumps at each home you propose to serve, correct?
Well, first of all, we did not do an analysis of each home to start with. We did not do a customer by customer analysis, but no, we did not do an analysis of cold climate heat pumps. And I think that has been discussed in this docket before, and it is just simply another choice that somebody can make. They can choose to heat with cold climate heat pump, they can choose to heat with natural gas, they can choose to heat with fuel oil or propane. We're bringing a choice that's more cost-effective and environmentally superior to what they're using today.
My next question relates to a question that the chairman asked earlier today. Your analysis assumed zero penetration of the market you're seeking to enter by cold climate heat pumps, correct?
No, I don't agree with that. If it assumes zero penetration, I made no assumption about the penetration of cold climate heat pumps. I made an assumption about the penetration of natural gas, and it left room in there for other heating sources to be used.
If you could turn to Exhibit 29, please. This is an answer to one of the Conservation Law Foundation's questions, question 1-18. Identify the assumptions regarding future fuel use 34 to 35 years in the future, on which VGS's analysis relies for the claimed break-even point referred to on page 4, line 19 of Mr. Rendell's 3/27/15 testimony? And your answer was, objection, analysis not conducted. Without waiving the objection, Vermont Gas did not conduct an analysis of Vermont's energy use 34 to 35 years in the future. Rather, it made assumptions regarding the fuel use of approximately 3,000 customers in Addison County 34 to 35 years in the future. Good.
Which is, I think, exactly what I just said regarding how much natural gas they would use 34 to 35 years in the future. I made no assumptions about what the folks that do not convert to natural gas will be using for their fuel.
So the analysis you did would be the same even if the subject of cold climate heat pumps had never entered this case. You'd have the same numbers as are discussed on this page, correct?
That's correct.
So that assumes zero penetration, does it not?
No, it does not. It says nothing about the penetration of cold climate heat pumps. It simply talks about the penetration assumed for natural gas.
But I think the point is, if you made the analysis and cold climate heat pumps, was to what extent did the advent of cold climate heat pumps as an alternative in Vermont affect your projection of how much penetration of gas you would have?
We did not modify our penetration rate or assumed penetration rate for customers based on any specific analysis of cold climate heat pumps. And I think partially because the penetration rates that we assumed were fairly conservative to start with. So there was certainly room for cold climate heat pumps to materialize in that market, and at least the current DPS figures still show natural gas as more cost competitive than cold climate heat pumps. So I'm not sure what we would have adjusted for.
Okay, thank you.
I have maybe 5 or 10 minutes more. It's 4:45. I can keep going, or?
Yeah, no, let's keep going.
Okay. You just answered the chairman's questions by saying the latest information from the department says that gas is a better deal for customers than cold climate heat pumps. Did I understand you correctly?
The April report, I actually don't know what the May and June one, I didn't look at those, so I'm recalling the April report.
Have you read Mr. Nemi's rebuttal testimony or rebuttal testimony?
I have.
He disagrees with what you just said. You understand that?
I recognize that.
Do you feel that you have more expertise about the energy efficiency of cold climate heat pumps than he does?
I do not, but I don't think that it's my job, or actually the job of anybody in this room, to dictate what customers will use. I think we have a very cost-effective alternative for customers that's on the table, and customers will make the right decision for themselves.
And presumably, they will make a decision based on which source gives them the most bang for the buck, dollars per BTU, correct?
We have spent a lot of time talking about dollars per BTU, and undeniably, that is a factor that customers, and it's a considerable factor that customers look at, but I don't think we can ignore other things that factor into a customer's decision-making. Comfort, aesthetics, availability of energy efficiency programs, regulated prices. Consumers weigh a lot of things before they make a decision.
Is electricity a regulated program?
It is. I didn't mean to imply it wasn't. My point was simply that there's other factors that go into consumer decision-making besides price.
If you could turn back to cross exhibit 3, the last line on the bottom. This was, again, an answer to department request VGS 1-1. And you finish your answer by saying, since the board did not quantify the net impact of the project in its initial order, a direct comparison is not possible. Did I read that correctly?
You did read that correctly. As I'm reading it here, I realize it's poorly worded. What it should have said is, the board did not aggregate and quantify the net impact of the project in its initial order, because there's numerous places in the initial order where there are economic benefits articulated. There's not any one place where they are compiled and rolled up into a number.
So the important point is to do apples to apples comparisons, is it not? If we're going to compare the situation we're in now with the situation the board addressed in December of 2013.
The reason I'm hesitating is I think the appropriate comparison is actually to where the board was after the first remand, so in its October order.
Well, again, that's the legal decision
It
for
is,
the board to make,
that,
not you to make.
but you, no, well, actually, you asked me the question, so I'm answering it the way I view it,
Fair
but you're
enough.
correct, it's a legal opinion.
If we want to do an apples to apples comparison between the situation we're in now and the situation the board was in when it made its decision in December of 2013, don't we need to look at the decision the board issued in 2013?
The board's decision in 2013 should guide our thinking in this docket, yes.
And as we went through with Mr. Heaps, the board's analysis was 20-year NPV, correct?
Correct?
And your expert, Mr. Heaps, when he did a 20-year NPV a few weeks ago, he came up with negative numbers for this project, correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yes. Mr. Heaps pre-filed testimony at page 10. -7 and -$10 million, the
For what
20-year NPV.
Oh, the 20, actually, I don't have Mr. Heaps' testimony for it. I'd like to read that in context, because I'd like to read it in context before I agree.
Jim, do you have the page?
Page 10.
Thank you. I believe you've taken Mr. Heaps' testimony out of context. He, for purposes of this, was replicating something Dr. Dismukes did. And he said using Dr. Dismukes' analysis as modified for a few key points, that's where that number comes from. That is not Mr. Heaps' independent economic analysis of the project over 20 years.
So Mr. Heaps' own view was we can leave out the lost disposable income caused by rate increases, correct? We don't have to include that in the analysis, correct?
Mr. Heaps' testimony speaks for itself.
So is what's on page 10 of his pre-file the only NPV analysis submitted by your company that does take into account job losses, income losses from loss of fuel dealer jobs, and lost disposable income through rate increases? That's a yes or no?
I'm sorry, actually, I'm sorry, I didn't hear a question, I heard it. Can you repeat it? I'm sorry, you were describing what we were saying.
Mr. Heaps' testimony on page 10,
Yes?
the 20-year NPV, the only analysis submitted by your company in all these proceedings, that is the 20-year NPV of this project, which takes into account the job losses from loss of fuel dealer jobs and the associated cash losses from loss of fuel dealer jobs and the lost disposable income from rate increases.
That is what this table shows, but again, I need to go back and see where that number came from, because he has, my understanding of reading this testimony here is it's simply his modification of Dr. Dismukes' work. I'd want to trace that back and see what was in and what wasn't in it.
Well, has the company submitted any other analysis that takes into account the lost jobs, the lost cash that goes to fuel dealers, and the lost disposable income that arises because of rate increases?
The company has not.
So this is all there is, isn't it?
This is a number in Mr. Heaps' testimony. My only point is, I'm looking at this table. I read back to see what it was prepared for. It was Mr. Heaps taking Dr. Dismukes' analysis and modifying it. I don't know that this is Mr. Heaps' independent assessment of what the outcome otherwise would have been, and I'm frankly not comfortable testifying to what Mr. Heaps might or might not have done. He simply started with Dr. Dismuke's work and modified it. And yes, those are the numbers that are in this table. I think it is not accurate to characterize it as the company's analysis of what it would have looked like.
But the company has submitted no other analysis that takes into account the factors that Mr. Carr took into account when he testified to the company in 2013, correct?
That is correct.
I think I'll stop there, thank you. I will move exhibits. If you want to, maybe I should go through my notes and move them tomorrow morning. Is it okay if I move my exhibits tomorrow morning?
That'd be fine unless you, but, because it'll take so much time, you mean?
I just have to go through my notes and make
All
sure.
right, why don't we wait till tomorrow morning to do that? And then, Mr. Grake, you're not ready to go today on
That
this,
is
is
correct.
that right? Is,
That is
Mr.
correct.
Sudek, are you ready to go now?
I think I could be much better if I could digest what's.
Okay, and then start tomorrow morning? And you'll be here tomorrow morning at 8:30 to meet with the staff? But you weren't this morning, and so that's a problem. So if you don't show up 8:30 tomorrow morning, you might not get to cross-examine, because we need you to identify the exhibits you want to use in the cross-examination and meet with the staff.
I'll be here.
Okay, thanks. Do you have any questions, or did you want to wait till tomorrow as well?
I do, I can wait till tomorrow.
I don't want you to wait, necessarily. I'd rather go if people want to go, because I'd like to get this over with, but,
Don't you love our company?
yeah. Well, I mean, I would like to complete this efficiently, is what I meant to say.
If you'd like, I have 5 minutes and I can.
If you
I
wouldn't
can
mind
do
doing
now
it,
for
that'd be
5
great.
minutes, that's
Thank
fine.
you.
I feel like I'm in law school and I'm the only person in the room who is prepared when the professor asks a question.
You get an A+.
Does that mean you'll decide in my favor? Good afternoon, Ms. Simollardes.
Good afternoon.
Your March 2015 testimony at Table 2 provides an analysis of the 35-year net present value. Is that correct?
Which table, please?
Table 2. And
Yes.
And the basis of the 35-year time frame is because that's roughly when the project will break even in terms of new customers?
Yes, with a caveat on what the definition of break even is. It is roughly between years 34 and 35 is when the Virgins and Middlebury markets on their own provide Vermont Gas's currently authorized rate of return, which is approximately 3 years different than when we were in the first remand.
And you'd agree that estimating benefits going out 35 years is not particularly reliable?
Nor is estimating costs out 35 years, and that's why we use a discount rate to adjust for that uncertainty.
And the discount rate applies to both the benefits and the costs?
Yes.
And common practice in terms of other proceedings that you've been involved with have not involved evaluating benefits over more than a 10 or 20-year time frame. Is that correct?
I've actually never been involved in a proceeding that evaluated economic benefits the way this one is being approached. I said this earlier when I was testifying, the Public Service Board does not have a guide or a cookbook or a manual about how economic benefits are being calculated. I have not seen an economic benefit analysis performed the way this one is being addressed, including future rate impact, et cetera.
You've been involved in other proceedings that have looked at future benefits of a project. Is that correct? Other expansion proceedings, for example.
Yes, but, yes, I have.
Okay. And do those look out over a 10 or 20-year time horizon?
That was my point. I've not been involved in a proceeding that even began to look at economic benefits the way this one does.
What do you mean by the way?
We've not, we've tried to take into account what the rate impact over a time period would be. The expansion projects I have been involved in, mostly been around transmission system looping, and the economic benefits there have either been a quantification of greenhouse gases, which yes, we used 20 years, or they were less concrete, and they were more, this project will enable construction-related jobs. This project will enable Vermont Gas to continue to expand and bring the benefits of natural gas service. Or we've quantified property taxes, but we've never done this sort of ledger analysis that says, here's a stream of benefits over 20 or 35 years, here's a stream of rate impact over the same time period, subtract one from the other and see if it's an economic benefit. I have never been involved in a 248 proceeding that attempted to analyze economic benefits that way.
Okay, thank you.
And those other cases that you were involved in are much smaller cases in terms of
Agreed.
dollar
Agreed.
than this case?
Yes.
And would you agree that there's been growth in the past 2 years of both net metered solar and heat pumps in Vermont?
I can't speak to the heat pumps because I truly don't know what the count is, and nor can I articulately speak to net solar other than what you see driving around the state or see on the Public Service Board's calendar. There does appear to be a tremendous amount of activity related to at least net solar.
And would you agree that both legislative and Public Service Board decisions have favored reducing fossil fuel use to address climate change impacts?
Yes.
And that looking forward 35 years, there will likely be an increase in the use of renewable and non-fossil fuel use in Vermont?
That is clearly one of our state goals, and I think that this project helps enable that.
This project would deliver fossil fuels to Vermont customers, correct?
This project will deliver a fossil fuel to Vermont customers, but it delivers a cleaner, more affordable fossil fuel to Vermont customers. And you heard Mr. Rendell speak this morning about renewable natural gas. Hopefully that this pipe will have more renewable natural gas in it 35 years in the future. I don't know.
That's a hope. There's no commitment to that. Is that correct?
The only commitment we have at the moment is to the renewable natural gas project in Salisbury to bring biomethane to Middlebury College.
And your evaluation did not look at the, to what extent over a period of 20 to 35 years, gas would replace heat pumps?
It did not.
Thank you, that's all I have.
All right, so we'll break now for the evening. We'll come back tomorrow and continue with Ms. Simollardes. And
Is it 8:30 that you want to do?
and we'd like the lawyers at least to be here tomorrow at 8:30 to do a pre-hearing meeting to go over what we're going to be doing. So thank you for today, and we'll see you tomorrow.
All right, my name is Katy Hellman. I am an organizer with 350 Vermont, and I've also been doing some work with Rising Tide Vermont. I helped organize for this action today by doing outreach. Right now, one of the most important things is getting people who are on the brink of becoming active to becoming active participants in the movement. I think it's becoming more and more obvious that this issue cuts across all different issues, and the more solidarity we can build between movement building and actions, the stronger our movement can become. I realize the dire circumstances of this situation. Right today are the final technical hearings for the Public Service Board, where they will reevaluate phase 1 of the pipeline and determine whether or not to permit the project. And phase 2 has been stopped recently. There's been a lot of positive momentum, lots of positive momentum. So we're hoping that by having an encampment out here today and a candlelit vigil to show the seriousness of the situation, and that there is a variety of people who are against phase 1 of the pipeline and the continued expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure in the state of Vermont, and also understanding that these sorts of things are happening all across the country, and it's important to do the work locally and globally keep those connections and the movement building.